The halo effect. When someone has one positive quality, we tend to assume they have other positive qualities too, even without evidence. If someone is attractive, we unconsciously assume they are also intelligent, kind, and competent. If someone is well-dressed, we assume they are successful. This is the halo effect, and it shapes first impressions powerfully. You can use this by leading with your strongest quality. If you are knowledgeable about a topic, demonstrate that first. People will then assume you are also organized, reliable, and competent in other areas. If you are warm and friendly, people will assume you are also honest and capable. The effect works in reverse too. One negative quality can create a negative halo where people assume multiple flaws. This is why first impressions matter so much. That initial assessment creates a filter through which everything else gets interpreted. In professional settings, demonstrating competence early in a relationship pays long-term dividends because of the halo effect. People will give you the benefit of the doubt in areas where they have not yet seen you perform. The effect is not permanent. If your later behavior contradicts the initial positive impression, the halo fades. But it gives you runway and goodwill while you establish yourself. You can also use this when recommending others or asking for favors. Leading with someone's most impressive quality creates a halo that makes people more receptive to the request. Understanding the halo effect also helps you resist it in your own judgments. When you notice yourself assuming things about someone based on limited information, pause and ask what you actually know versus what you are assuming. This leads to more accurate assessments and fairer treatment of others. The halo effect is a cognitive shortcut. Our brains are constantly trying to make quick judgments with limited information. When we see one strong signal, we extrapolate from it to fill in the gaps. This works well enough most of the time that evolution kept this shortcut in place, but it leads to systematic errors in judgment. Attractive people get treated better in the justice system, in hiring, and in everyday interactions, even though attractiveness has nothing to do with competence or character. Understanding this bias does not eliminate it, but it does give you tools to work with it and occasionally compensate for it in your own thinking. The Benjamin Franklin Effect. This one sounds backward at first. If you want someone to like you more, ask them to do you a small favor. Common sense suggests you should do favors for them instead, but the opposite works better. When someone does something nice for you, their brain needs to justify why they helped. The easiest explanation is that they must like you, otherwise why would they have helped? This creates a positive feeling toward you that was not there before. The effect is named after Benjamin Franklin, who used it to win over a rival. He asked to borrow a rare book from someone who disliked him. The man lent the book, and afterward, their relationship improved dramatically. The rival had to rationalize lending something valuable to someone he supposedly disliked, so his brain decided he must not dislike Franklin that much after all. The favor needs to be specific and small enough that they will say yes, but meaningful enough that it requires actual effort. Asking someone to send you a file or explain something they know well works perfectly. Generic requests do not create the same effect. The key is that they need to feel like they chose to help you, not that they were forced or manipulated into it. If someone feels obligated or pressured, it backfires and creates resentment instead. This technique builds rapport naturally because it creates a sense of investment. Once someone has helped you, they become more interested in your success. They want to see their effort was worthwhile. This is why mentors often become so invested in the people they help. The act of helping creates the relationship, not the other way around. The psychological mechanism here is cognitive dissonance. People need their actions and beliefs to align. When their actions suggest they like someone, their beliefs adjust to match. The effect is stronger when the person cannot attribute their help to external pressure or rewards. If you pay them or they help because their boss told them to, the effect disappears. The help needs to feel voluntary for the brain to use it as evidence of liking. You can amplify this effect by expressing genuine gratitude afterward and by following up later to let them know how their help made a difference. This closes the loop and reinforces the positive feelings their act of helping created. It also opens the door for an ongoing relationship where helping becomes a pattern that further solidifies the connection between you. The power of labeling. When you assign a label to someone, they tend to live up to that label, for better or worse. If you tell someone they are helpful, hardworking, creative, or honest, they will act in ways that confirm that identity. This is called the labeling technique. People want their actions to match how they are described, especially if the label is positive and comes from someone whose opinion they value. Teachers who tell students they are naturally talented at something see those students try harder and improve faster. The label creates expectation and motivation. You can use this in relationships, at work, and with yourself. Describing someone as trustworthy makes them more likely to act trustworthy because they want to live up to that description. The label needs to be believable and specific. Vague praise like, "You are great," does not create the same effect as "You are someone who really pays attention to details." The specificity makes it feel like a genuine observation rather than empty flattery. This works with negative labels too, which is why you need to be careful. Calling someone lazy or irresponsible can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. They start to see themselves that way and act accordingly. When dealing with behavior you want to change, label the positive opposite of what you want to eliminate. Instead of calling someone disorganized, look for any moment of organization and label them as someone who is getting more organized. This gives them an identity to grow into rather than one to defend. You can also use this on yourself through positive self-talk. The labels you apply to yourself in your inner dialogue shape your behavior more than you realize. Start describing yourself as disciplined, confident, or capable, and your actions will shift to match those labels over time. The labeling effect works because identity is not fixed. People are constantly constructing and reconstructing their sense of who they are, based on feedback from others and from their own observations of their behavior. When someone you respect labels you in a particular way, that input carries weight in your ongoing identity construction. The label becomes part of how you see yourself, and behavior naturally flows from that self-concept. This is why early labels from parents and teachers can have such lasting impact. Those early descriptions become foundational to identity formation. But the plasticity of identity also means that new labels can reshape self-concept at any age. The technique is most effective when the label is aspirational but believable. Too far from current reality, and the person rejects it as false. Close enough to be credible, and it pulls them toward that identity. Strategic vulnerability. Sharing something personal or admitting uncertainty creates connection faster than projecting strength. When you reveal a struggle, doubt, or fear, others feel permission to do the same. This vulnerability builds trust because it signals you are being authentic rather than performing. The key is choosing the right vulnerability for the context. Deep emotional revelations are appropriate for close relationships but might be uncomfortable with acquaintances or colleagues. Match the level of vulnerability to the relationship stage. In professional settings, admitting you are uncertain about the best approach to a problem invites collaboration rather than making you look weak. It shows confidence in your ability to handle ambiguity and openness to input. Personal relationships deepen when both people share vulnerabilities. One-sided vulnerability where only one person opens up creates imbalance. The other person either needs to reciprocate or the relationship stays shallow. Strategic vulnerability means being intentional about what you share and when. Not every thought or feeling needs to be expressed. Some privacy and mystery is healthy, but calculated perfection creates distance. People trust those who seem human over those who seem flawless. Timing matters here too. Leading with vulnerability before establishing any competence or connection can overwhelm people. They do not yet care about your struggles because they do not know you. Build a baseline of interaction first, then introduce vulnerability gradually. The effect is powerful because vulnerability signals trust. By sharing something you could be judged for, you show that you trust the other person not to use it against you. This often triggers reciprocal trust. They feel honored that you trusted them and become more trustworthy in return. Relationships built without vulnerability tend to be fragile because neither person feels truly known or accepted. The connection stays at the surface level where everything is pleasant but nothing is real. Vulnerability is the pathway to depth. It transforms casual relationships into meaningful ones. The risk is real, though. Not everyone will respond well to vulnerability. Some people are not ready for that level of connection, or they use vulnerability against you. This is why strategic vulnerability includes assessing the other person and the context. You are not being vulnerable with everyone equally. You are choosing moments and people where vulnerability is likely to deepen connection rather than create problems. The ability to be strategically vulnerable while also maintaining appropriate boundaries is a sophisticated social skill that pays enormous dividends in the quality of relationships you build. The power pose. Your body language does not just communicate to others. It also sends signals to your own brain. Holding your body in expansive, open postures for a couple minutes before a high-stakes situation actually changes your hormones and mindset. Standing with your feet apart, shoulders back, and arms either raised or on your hips increases feelings of confidence and power. This is called a power pose. The effect works because the brain and body communicate both directions. Just like feeling confident makes you stand taller, standing taller can make you feel more confident. Research in this area has been debated, but many people report real benefits from the practice. Before interviews, presentations, or difficult conversations, spending 2 minutes in a private space holding a power pose can shift your mental state. The key is doing this privately, not in front of the people you are trying to impress. Walking into a room with overly dominant body language can backfire. The pose is for you, not them. Slumped, closed body postures do the opposite. They can actually make you feel more nervous and defeated. If you are sitting hunched over your phone right before something important, you are priming yourself for low confidence. The effect is not just about big poses before major events. Your everyday posture matters too. Chronically, sitting collapsed over a computer trains your brain to associate that posture with your baseline state. Taking regular breaks to stand, stretch, and open up your body helps maintain better overall mood and energy. Some people find that changing their physical state is faster and easier than trying to change their mental state directly. If you are feeling anxious or unmotivated, changing your posture and movement can shift your internal experience faster than trying to think your way into feeling different. The connection between body and mind is bidirectional and immediate. Physical changes create mental changes and vice versa. Understanding this gives you another tool for managing your state. Beyond just posture, movement itself affects mood and cognition. Walking while thinking about a problem often leads to better solutions than sitting still. The physical movement seems to facilitate mental movement. Similarly, exercise before cognitively demanding tasks improves performance. The body-mind connection is not mystical or vague. It is a physiological reality where physical states influence neurochemistry, which influences thoughts and emotions. Using your body strategically to influence your mind is simply leveraging this natural connection. The 2-minute rule. If something takes less than 2 minutes, do it immediately rather than adding it to a task list. This simple rule prevents small tasks from accumulating into overwhelming lists. The mental overhead of tracking a small task often exceeds the effort of just doing it. When you immediately handle quick tasks, you prevent the buildup of mental clutter. Your task list stays focused on items that actually require dedicated time and attention. The rule also creates momentum. Completing small tasks immediately provides frequent small wins that maintain energy and motivation. Each completion, no matter how minor, provides a tiny sense of accomplishment. These accumulate throughout the day and improve your overall sense of productivity. The 2-minute threshold is somewhat arbitrary. The principle is about immediately handling things that are quick relative to the overhead of tracking them. For some people and contexts, the threshold might be 1 minute or 5 minutes. The key is recognizing when tracking a task takes more effort than executing it. You can also use a version of this rule for habit building. When building a new habit, start with a version so easy it takes less than 2 minutes. Want to start exercising? Begin with 2 minutes of activity. Want to start meditating? Start with 2 minutes of sitting quietly. The ease of the 2-minute version removes barriers to starting, and starting is often the hardest part. Once the habit of starting is established, expanding the time is much easier. The rule works because friction and overhead are real costs. Every item on your task list requires mental energy to remember and track. For small items, this cost exceeds the value. Immediate action eliminates the overhead cost entirely. The challenge is discipline. It is tempting to defer everything to later, thinking you will batch small tasks. But batching small tasks rarely happens as planned, and the accumulation creates stress. Immediate handling of quick items keeps your mental workspace clear and your momentum strong. The mere exposure effect. Simply being exposed to something repeatedly makes you like it more, assuming the initial reaction was not strongly negative. This is the mere exposure effect. Repeated exposure breeds familiarity, and familiarity breeds liking. This works with people, products, ideas, and even arbitrary stimuli. Songs that sound strange at first become enjoyable after hearing them several times. People you see regularly become more likable, even if you never interact with them directly. The effect happens unconsciously. You do not need to be aware of the repetition for it to work. In fact, subliminal exposure, where you do not even consciously register seeing something, still produces the effect. You can use this by ensuring repeated presence. If you want people to feel more positively toward you, find reasons to be around them regularly. The exposure itself, even without deep interaction, builds positive feeling over time. For ideas you want to promote, repeat them. Say the same thing multiple times in different ways. The repetition makes the idea more familiar and therefore more acceptable. Marketing relies heavily on this. Companies advertise not just to inform, but to create repeated exposure. Each exposure, even if you ignore the ad, slightly increases your positive feeling toward the brand. This makes you more likely to choose that brand when you eventually need what they sell. The effect has limits. Too much exposure leads to boredom or annoyance. There is an optimal level of repetition, usually several exposures but not constant bombardment. The effect also requires that initial reactions were neutral or mildly positive. If someone strongly dislikes something, repeated exposure can intensify the dislike rather than creating liking. This is why first impressions still matter, even though mere exposure is powerful. You need to start from at least a neutral position for repeated exposure to create positive feeling. Understanding this effect helps you be patient with relationship building and idea promotion. Change does not happen instantly. Repeated positive exposure over time is often more effective than trying to create immediate dramatic impact. Social proof. People look to others to determine how they should behave, especially in uncertain situations. When you show that others are already doing something, it makes that action seem safe, correct, and desirable. This is social proof, and it is one of the strongest influences on human behavior. Restaurants put their waiting list outside, so people see others want to eat there. Bars seed their tip jars with bills so patrons see that tipping is normal. Websites show how many people have bought a product or signed up for a service. All of these leverage social proof. You can use this principle by highlighting what others have done in similar situations. When asking someone to help with something, mentioning that others have already contributed makes them more likely to join in. When proposing an idea, noting who else supports it makes it more credible. The effect is strongest when the others are similar to the person you are trying to influence. Mentioning that experts endorse something works for some audiences, but for others, knowing that people like them have done it is more persuasive. Teenagers care more about what other teenagers are doing than what adults recommend. Professionals care what other professionals in their field are doing. Match your social proof to your audience. The principle works in reverse too. If you show that no one else is doing something, it becomes less appealing. This is why empty restaurants struggle to attract customers while busy ones have lines. The lack of customers serves as negative social proof. People assume something must be wrong if no one else is there. You can also use social proof negatively by highlighting undesirable behaviors you want people to avoid. Showing that most people do not litter or that most people pay their taxes on time creates social pressure to conform to that majority behavior. The technique is powerful because humans are deeply social creatures. For most of our evolutionary history, going against the group was dangerous. Those who conformed to group norms survived better than lone rebels. This created strong psychological pressure to follow what others are doing. In modern contexts, this instinct persists even when the stakes are much lower. We still look to others for cues about correct behavior, even in situations where conformity is not actually necessary for survival. The deadline effect. Tasks expand to fill the time available for them. This is Parkinson's law, and you can use it to your advantage. When you set a shorter deadline for yourself or others, the work gets done faster without necessarily losing quality. The sense of urgency focuses attention and eliminates time-wasting behaviors. Open-ended timelines lead to procrastination and overthinking. Everything feels less urgent, so other priorities take over. Creating artificial deadlines, even when there is no external pressure, forces you to prioritize and execute. When delegating tasks, always include a specific deadline. Saying "whenever you get a chance" almost guarantees it will not happen soon. Saying "by Thursday afternoon" creates accountability and urgency. The deadline needs to be reasonable but tight. Too much buffer time invites delay. When working on your own projects, break them into smaller pieces with individual deadlines, rather than one distant final deadline. This prevents the project from feeling overwhelming and creates regular moments of completion that maintain momentum. Deadlines also force decision-making. When you have limited time, you cannot endlessly research and debate options. You have to commit to a direction and move forward. This is often better than the analysis paralysis that comes with unlimited time. People respect deadlines more when consequences are clear. If missing a deadline has no real impact, it stops being effective. Build in actual stakes when possible. This might mean scheduling something immediately after that depends on finishing the current task. External accountability makes deadlines more powerful. Telling others about your deadline creates social pressure to follow through. The fear of looking irresponsible to others is often stronger than internal motivation alone. The psychological mechanism behind deadline effectiveness is related to how our brains process time. Distant deadlines feel abstract and unreal. Our future self seems like a different person, so we leave problems for that future person to handle. Tight deadlines make the future feel immediate and real. The consequences of inaction become vivid rather than theoretical. This shifts behavior from passive to active. The deadline effect also works because it creates a sense of scarcity. When time is unlimited, it feels abundant and therefore less valuable. When time is scarce, each hour becomes precious and gets used more intentionally. This scarcity mindset eliminates the casual waste that happens when resources feel infinite. The primacy and recency effects. In any list or sequence, people remember the first and last items better than the middle ones. This is the combination of primacy effect for first items and recency effect for last items. The middle gets forgotten. You can use this when presenting information. Put your most important points first and last. The middle is where attention wanes and memory weakens, so that is where you put supporting details or less critical information. In interviews or meetings, what you say in the opening and closing matters most. The middle of the conversation affects the flow but is less likely to be remembered clearly. First impressions and last impressions both matter enormously. The primacy effect works because first information shapes how subsequent information is interpreted. The initial framing creates a lens through which everything else is viewed. This is why leading with your strongest points establishes credibility that carries through the rest of your presentation. The recency effect works because the last thing people hear is still in working memory when they make judgments or decisions. It has not yet been displaced by other information. In negotiations, making your final offer strong leaves them with a positive last impression. In conversations, ending on a positive note shapes how the entire interaction is remembered. You can also use this to structure written communication. The first paragraph and last paragraph of an email or document are most likely to be read and remembered. If people are skimming, they read the beginning and end. Put critical information there. For learning and memory, the primacy and recency effects suggest that the middle of study sessions is least effective. Break long study sessions into multiple shorter ones to create more beginnings and endings, which are remembered better. Understanding these effects also helps you notice when you are being influenced by them. If you judge a presentation entirely based on a strong opening and closing while ignoring weak arguments in the middle, the primacy and recency effects are distorting your evaluation. Sometimes the middle contains crucial information that deserves more weight than these memory effects give it. The spotlight effect. People think others notice and remember their mistakes, awkward moments, and flaws much more than they actually do. This is called the spotlight effect. You feel like a spotlight is shining on you and everyone is watching, but in reality, most people are too worried about themselves to pay much attention to you. Understanding this frees you from a lot of unnecessary anxiety. That embarrassing thing you did last week that you keep replaying in your mind? Most people who were there have already forgotten it. They were too focused on their own concerns to encode your moment into long-term memory. Research demonstrates this clearly. When people wear embarrassing clothing and estimate how many others noticed, they overestimate dramatically. Only a fraction of the people they thought noticed actually paid any attention. This applies to public speaking, social gatherings, and everyday interactions. Your audience is not scrutinizing every word and gesture the way you think they are. They are thinking about what they will say next, what they look like, whether they seem interesting, and dozens of other self-focused thoughts. Knowing this helps you take more social risks. Try that new hobby. Speak up in meetings. Approach new people. The consequences of small failures are much less than you imagine, because people simply are not paying that much attention. The flip side is that your successes also get noticed less than you hope. But that is a fair trade for the freedom that comes from realizing you are not under constant observation and judgment. The spotlight is mostly in your own head. Once you internalize this, social anxiety decreases substantially because you realize the audience you fear is largely imaginary. Most people are too busy worrying about how they appear to judge you harshly. And even when they do notice something, they forget quickly because your moment is not as significant to them as it is to you. Their lives continue with their own dramas and concerns, and your embarrassing moment is just a tiny blip in their experience. This is actually freeing rather than depressing. It means you have much more room to experiment, fail, and try again than you think. The social cost of mistakes is usually tiny because other people simply are not keeping score the way you fear they are. The sunk-cost fallacy. People continue investing in something because they have already invested so much, even when continuing makes no sense. The past investment is gone and cannot be recovered, but people let it influence their current decisions anyway. This is the sunk-cost fallacy. Someone stays in a bad relationship because they have already invested years in it. Someone continues a failing project because they have already spent so much money and time on it. The rational approach is to ignore sunk costs and make decisions based only on future costs and benefits. What has already been spent is gone, regardless of what you do next. You can recognize this fallacy in yourself by noticing when your justification for continuing is based on past investment rather than future expected return. I have already spent so much on this as a red flag. The right question is, if I were starting fresh today, would I make this choice? If no, then you should probably stop, regardless of past investment. Understanding this fallacy helps you cut losses earlier. The ability to walk away from bad investments is crucial for success. Those who cannot let go of sunk costs throw good money and time after bad, making losses worse. You can also use awareness of this fallacy strategically. When you want someone to commit to seeing something through, get them to invest early. Once they have invested time, money, or effort, they will be reluctant to walk away, even if better options emerge. This is why subscription services, gym memberships, and long-term contracts work. The upfront commitment creates sunk costs that keep people engaged even when they are not getting much value. The ethical line here is whether you are providing real value. If your product or service delivers what it promises, using commitment to maintain engagement is fine. If you are exploiting sunk cost fallacy to keep people paying for something that does not benefit them, that crosses into manipulation. The fallacy exists because loss aversion is so strong. Admitting that past investment was wasted feels like accepting a loss. Continuing feels like there is still a chance to make those past investments worthwhile. This hope keeps people trapped in bad situations longer than they should stay. Anchoring in negotiations. The first number mentioned in any negotiation becomes the anchor point that shapes the entire discussion. Everything else gets compared to that initial figure. If you are selling something, you want to be the first one to name a price, and you want that price to be higher than what you expect to get. This sets the anchor high. Even when negotiations bring the price down, it will likely end up higher than if the other person had set a lower anchor first. This works because human brains are bad at assessing absolute value. We rely on relative comparisons instead. Once that first number is out there, it becomes the reference point. If you are buying something, you want to anchor low for the same reason. Research shows this effect is incredibly strong. Even when people know about anchoring and try to resist it, the first number still influences their decisions. Real estate agents use this constantly. Showing an overpriced house first makes everything else seem more reasonable. The anchor does not even need to be related to what you are negotiating. Studies have shown that even random numbers can create anchoring effects. When people were shown higher numbers before estimating the value of something, their estimates went up, even though the numbers had nothing to do with the item. The effect works best when the anchor is not so extreme that people immediately dismiss it as ridiculous. It needs to be ambitious but defensible. You also strengthen your anchor by providing reasoning or comparisons that support it, even if those justifications are not particularly strong. The simple act of explaining why your anchor makes sense helps it stick in the other person's mind. Another way to use anchoring is through ranges. Instead of naming a single number, give a range where even the low end is acceptable to you. The other person will typically focus on the lower end of your range, but that low end might still be higher than where they would have started without the anchor. Be careful though, because this can backfire if your range is too wide, or if the low end is below what you actually want. The anchoring effect persists throughout negotiations. Even as numbers change, that initial anchor continues to influence the final outcome in subtle ways. Professional negotiators understand this and put tremendous thought into who should make the first offer and what that offer should be. The curiosity gap. When you reveal that you know something interesting but do not immediately tell people what it is, you create a curiosity gap. The gap between what people know and what they want to know creates tension that demands resolution. This makes people pay attention and seek out the information. Headlines use this constantly. You will never believe what happened next, or the one thing experts do not want you to know. Create curiosity gaps. The headline tells you something interesting exists but withholds what it is, compelling you to click to find out. You can use this in conversations and presentations by hinting at interesting information before revealing it. This creates engagement and ensures people are paying attention when you deliver the actual information. The key is that the gap needs to be specific enough to be interesting, but vague enough to create genuine curiosity. If you reveal too much, there is no gap. If you reveal too little, people do not care enough to invest effort in finding out more. The sweet spot is giving enough information to suggest something valuable while leaving the core unknown. The technique works because unresolved questions create mental tension. The brain does not like unanswered questions. It wants to close open loops. This is related to the Zeigarnik Effect, but focused specifically on information gaps. Once you are curious about something, that curiosity persists until satisfied. You can use this for yourself when learning. If you start by surveying what you do not know about a topic, you create curiosity gaps that make the learning process more engaging. The questions drive you to find answers rather than passively receiving information. The downside of curiosity gaps is when they are used manipulatively. If the revealed information does not live up to the promise of the gap, people feel cheated and lose trust. The payoff needs to be worth the build-up. Clickbait that promises shocking information but delivers nothing useful damages credibility. Used ethically with genuine valuable information, curiosity gaps are simply good communication design that leverages natural human psychology to ensure important information gets attention. The halo effect reversal. Just as one positive quality creates a positive halo, one negative quality creates a negative halo that makes people assume other negative qualities. Understanding this helps you avoid letting one flaw disproportionately color your overall impression. Someone who is awkward socially might be brilliant technically, but the social awkwardness creates a negative halo that makes you doubt their technical skills. Consciously evaluating different dimensions separately helps you see people more accurately. The reverse also matters when presenting yourself. One visible flaw can create a negative halo that obscures your strengths. Managing first impressions means addressing potential negative signals that might create negative halos. This does not mean being fake, but being aware of what signals you are sending. In professional contexts, small things like being late, being poorly dressed for the context, or having errors in written communication can create negative halos that make people discount your actual capabilities. These are not the most important things about you, but they are visible signals that shape first impressions. Understanding this helps you be strategic about first impressions without becoming obsessed with perfection. The goal is avoiding obvious negative signals while being authentic about who you are. You can also help others avoid negative halos by explicitly noting the separation between different qualities. When someone makes a mistake in one area, explicitly state that this does not reflect on their competence in other areas. This prevents the negative halo from forming. The effect is powerful because our minds seek consistency. One data point gets extrapolated into assumptions about a whole person. Fighting this tendency requires conscious effort to evaluate different dimensions independently rather than letting one dimension contaminate others. The Pygmalion Effect. Expectations influence outcomes. When someone expects you to perform well, you tend to perform better. When they expect you to perform poorly, performance suffers. This is the Pygmalion Effect, and it works through subtle changes in behavior. People who expect great things from you treat you differently. They give you more opportunities, more support, more patience when you struggle. They interpret your behavior more charitably. All of this makes success more likely. You can use this by communicating positive expectations to others. When you tell someone you expect them to succeed at something, you increase the likelihood they will. Your expectation shapes how you interact with them, which shapes their performance. This works with employees, students, teammates, and even your own children. The effect is stronger when the person whose expectations matter has some authority or credibility. Random strangers expecting you to succeed has less impact than someone you respect expecting you to succeed. The expectations also need to be believable. Expecting someone to do something completely beyond their capabilities does not help. The sweet spot is expectations that are ambitious but achievable. You can also manipulate this effect for yourself by choosing to be around people who have high expectations of you. Their expectations will push you to perform better than you would around people with low expectations. This is one reason why your peer group matters so much. If your friends expect mediocrity, you will tend toward mediocrity. If they expect excellence, you will stretch toward excellence. The mechanism works through self-fulfilling prophecy. Expectations create behaviors that make the expectations come true. If someone expects you to fail, they might give you less support, which makes failure more likely, which confirms their expectation. If they expect success, they provide more support. Success becomes more likely, confirming their positive expectation. Understanding this helps you be more intentional about the expectations you communicate to others, and more selective about whose expectations you allow to influence you. The self-serving bias. People attribute success to their own abilities and effort, but attribute failure to external circumstances and bad luck. This is the self-serving bias. When things go well, you take credit. When things go badly, you blame the situation. This bias protects self-esteem, but distorts learning. If you do not acknowledge your role in failures, you do not learn from them and do not improve. You can fight this bias by consciously asking what you could have done differently when things go wrong. This does not mean blaming yourself for everything, but taking ownership of your contribution to outcomes helps you improve. The bias also affects how you perceive others. You judge others harshly for failures while assuming successes are due to luck or circumstances. This is related to the fundamental attribution error but specific to success and failure outcomes. Being aware of the bias helps you be more fair. When someone succeeds, acknowledge their skill and effort. When they fail, consider the circumstances. When you succeed, acknowledge the circumstances that helped. When you fail, take responsibility for your part. This balanced attribution is more accurate and more fair. The self-serving bias also affects group dynamics. Everyone in a successful project takes credit, and everyone in a failed project blames others or circumstances. This creates conflict and prevents learning. Teams that can honestly assess both individual and circumstantial contributions to outcomes function better. You can use the bias strategically in how you communicate. When talking about successes, frame your personal contribution. When talking about failures, frame the learning and what you will do differently. This maintains credibility while protecting reputation. The key is not lying but choosing what to emphasize. You did contribute to success, so emphasizing that is honest. You did learn from failure, so emphasizing that is honest. The self-serving bias is natural and probably not going away, so the goal is managing it rather than eliminating it. Recognize it in yourself, compensate for it in your judgments of others, and use it consciously in how you present yourself. The nostalgia effect. Memories of the past often feel better than the past actually was. Nostalgia is a selective memory filter that emphasizes positive aspects and downplays negative ones. This makes people value things associated with their past more than objectively identical things without that association. Music from your teenage years sounds better than objectively similar music from other eras because of nostalgic association. Products that evoke childhood memories sell better, even if newer alternatives are objectively superior. You can tap into nostalgia by connecting what you offer to positive memories. References to shared cultural touchstones, reminders of earlier times, and packaging or presentation that evokes the past all trigger nostalgic feelings. Those feelings then get associated with your product or message. Nostalgia is powerful because it offers psychological comfort. The past is fixed and known, which feels safe compared to an uncertain future. In times of change or stress, nostalgic appeal increases. People seek the comfort of familiar things from simpler times. The effect is not just about age. Even recent experiences become tinged with nostalgia quickly. People feel nostalgic for college within a year of graduating. The key element is that the time period is over and cannot be returned to. That finality makes us romanticize it. You can use nostalgia personally to boost mood. Reflecting on positive memories, looking at old photos, or listening to music from happy times creates genuine emotional uplift. The fact that the memories are selectively positive does not make the positive feelings less real. The risk with nostalgia is getting stuck in the past. If you are constantly comparing the present unfavorably to a romanticized past, you miss opportunities in the present. Healthy nostalgia means enjoying positive memories without being controlled by them. The past can inform and enrich the present without imprisoning it. Understanding the nostalgia effect helps you recognize when you are making decisions based on romanticized memories rather than current reality. It also helps you connect with others by acknowledging shared experiences and memories that create emotional bonds. The liking principle. We are more likely to say yes to people we like. This seems obvious, but understanding what makes people likable gives you specific tools to build rapport. People like those who are similar to them, who complement them, who cooperate with them toward shared goals, and who are attractive or familiar. You can increase liking by finding genuine commonalities and mentioning them. Shared interests, backgrounds, or experiences create connection. People feel understood by those who are similar. Genuine compliments work when they are specific and sincere. Generic flattery often backfires, but noticing and appreciating specific qualities or actions builds rapport. The compliment should be about something the person values and has control over. Complimenting choices they made works better than complimenting innate traits. Cooperating toward shared goals creates liking through the process of working together. Shared struggles and victories bond people. This is why team-building activities focus on collaborative challenges. Physical attractiveness increases liking, but you have more control over this than you might think. Grooming, posture, and how you carry yourself affect perceived attractiveness significantly. Familiarity also breeds liking. The mere exposure effect means that simply seeing someone repeatedly increases how much you like them, assuming the interactions are neutral or positive. This is why proximity is such a strong predictor of friendship. You become friends with neighbors and coworkers partly because you see them often. You can use this by showing up consistently. Regular presence builds familiarity, which builds liking over time. The principle works in marketing too. Companies want you to like their brand because you are more likely to buy from brands you like. They create this liking through association with things you already like, through creating a personality for the brand that matches their target audience, and through repeated exposure. Understanding this principle helps you be more intentional about building liking in your relationships, while also helping you recognize when others are using these techniques on you. The implementation, intention. Goals stated as specific if-then plans are much more likely to be achieved than general goals. This is the implementation intention technique. Instead of, I will exercise more, the implementation intention is, if it is Monday, Wednesday, or Friday morning, then I will go to the gym before work. The specific trigger and action make the behavior much more likely to happen. The technique works because it delegates the decision to your environment. When Monday morning comes, you do not have to decide whether to exercise. The decision was made in advance and linked to a specific trigger. You just have to execute. This removes the moment of decision, where motivation often fails. You can use this for any behavior you want to make more consistent. Identify the trigger situation and link it to the specific action you want to take. The trigger should be a concrete situation you will encounter, not a vague time or feeling. The action should be specific and immediately doable. The if-then format is important. It creates a mental link between situation and action that makes the action more automatic. Over time, the trigger starts to cue the action without much conscious decision. This is how habits form. Implementation intentions accelerate habit formation by creating clear trigger-action links from the start. You can also use implementation intentions for one-time tasks. If you need to remember to do something in a specific situation, create an if-then link. If I see this person, then I will ask them about the report. The link makes you much more likely to remember in the moment. The technique works for avoiding behaviors too. If I feel stressed, then I will take 3 deep breaths instead of checking social media. The if-then link gives you an alternative action in the trigger moment. Research consistently shows implementation intentions dramatically improve goal achievement. The effect is large and reliable. The main reason people do not use this technique is that it requires a few minutes of planning up front. That small investment pays enormous dividends in execution. Taking time to define your if-then links is one of the highest return activities for achieving goals and building habits. The framing effect. How information is presented matters as much as what information is presented. The same facts can lead to different conclusions depending on framing. A product that is 90% fat-free sounds better than one that contains 10% fat, even though these statements are identical. A treatment with a 90% survival rate seems better than one with a 10% mortality rate. The frame shapes perception and decision-making. You can use this by choosing frames that emphasize the aspects most relevant to your goals. When trying to motivate action, frame things in terms of losses rather than gains when possible. People are more motivated to avoid losses than achieve equivalent gains. Saying someone will lose money by not taking action is more motivating than saying they will save money by taking action. When building confidence, frame challenges in terms of what can be gained rather than what might be lost. The same situation framed differently creates different emotional responses. In negotiations, frame your offer in terms of what the other party gains rather than what they give up. The gain frame feels more positive, even when the underlying terms are the same. Be aware of how others are framing situations for you. Marketing, politics, and persuasion all rely heavily on framing. The facts might be accurate, but the frame determines what conclusion feels natural. Asking, "What would this look like framed differently?" helps you see past manipulative framing. You can reframe situations for yourself too. When facing a challenge, try framing it as an opportunity rather than a threat. This does not change the objective situation, but it changes your psychological response to it. The same event can be devastating or exciting depending entirely on frame. The power of framing comes from the fact that humans do not process raw information objectively. We process information through interpretive frameworks. The frame provides the interpretation. Once a frame is established, information gets filtered through it, reinforcing the frame. This is why first impressions and initial framing are so powerful. They establish the interpretive framework for everything that follows. The frog in boiling water. Gradual changes go unnoticed, while sudden changes trigger response. This is the frog in boiling water principle. If you drop a frog in boiling water, it jumps out. If you put it in cool water and slowly heat it, the frog does not notice the gradual change and stays until it is too late. This explains why people tolerate situations that deteriorate slowly, but would never accept if they jump to the final state immediately. You can use this understanding to protect yourself. Regularly step back and assess your situation as if you were seeing it fresh. Would you accept this if it were presented to you now, rather than being the result of gradual change? If not, it is time to make a change, even though the gradual process made it seem normal. The effect also works in reverse. Gradual positive changes go unnoticed too. You do not notice yourself getting stronger if you exercise daily, but someone who sees you after months notices the difference. This is why tracking and measuring are important. They make gradual change visible. The principle applies to organizational and cultural change. Sudden dramatic changes trigger resistance. Gradual change in the same direction might be accepted because each small step seems reasonable, even though the cumulative change is large. This is both a risk and an opportunity. The risk is accepting gradual deterioration. The opportunity is achieving significant change through small incremental steps that avoid triggering resistance. When you want to change something, small consistent steps work better than dramatic shifts. Each small change is easier to accept, and their cumulative effect can be substantial. This is how habits form and how organizations transform, not through dramatic moments but through consistent small changes that compound over time. Understanding the frog in boiling water effect helps you be intentional about gradual change. Use it to achieve positive changes through small steps, and protect yourself from negative changes by regularly reassessing whether you would accept the current state if presented with it suddenly rather than arriving gradually. The illusion of transparency. You overestimate how much others can tell what you are thinking and feeling. This is the illusion of transparency. You feel like your emotions and thoughts are obvious to others when they are actually much less visible than you imagine. This relates to the spotlight effect but focuses specifically on internal states rather than behavior. Understanding this reduces social anxiety. That nervousness you feel during a presentation is not as obvious to the audience as you fear. Your internal turmoil is largely invisible to others. This frees you to take social risks because others cannot see your uncertainty the way you can feel it. The illusion also creates communication problems. You assume others understand your meaning when they do not. What is clear in your head is not necessarily clear in your communication. Being more explicit than feels necessary often turns out to be just right for ensuring understanding. You can use this understanding to be more explicit in your communication without worrying about over-explaining. What feels like too much explanation to you is often appropriate for your audience. They do not have the context and internal model you have, so they need more explanation than your illusion of transparency suggests. The effect works both ways. Just as others do not see your internal states clearly, you do not see theirs either. People are often struggling or uncertain in ways not visible to you. This should make you more compassionate and less quick to judge. That person who seems confident might be nervous. That person who seems fine might be struggling. You cannot see their internal experience the way you can see your own. The illusion of transparency is another example of the difference between internal and external perspectives. Your internal experience is vivid and overwhelming to you, but largely invisible to others. Their internal experience is similarly invisible to you, though vivid to them. Remembering this gap helps you communicate more effectively and judge others more fairly. The goal gradient effect. Motivation increases as you get closer to completing a goal. This is the goal gradient effect. The finish line draws you forward with increasing intensity. Marathon runners speed up in the final stretch. Students work harder as deadlines approach. The effect happens even with artificial goals. Coffee shop loyalty cards with 10 spaces get completed faster when they start with 2 spaces already stamped versus starting completely empty. The progress toward the goal, even artificial progress, motivates continued effort. You can use this by breaking large goals into smaller milestones. Each milestone acts as a mini goal that provides the motivational boost of approaching completion. Instead of one distant goal that provides no gradient effect for most of the journey, you have multiple goals where you are regularly approaching completion. Visual progress indicators leverage this effect. Progress bars, checklists, and charts that show advancement toward goals all create visible proximity to completion that motivates continued effort. This is why step counters and habit trackers are effective. They make progress visible and create gradient effects throughout the day or week. You can also use this to help others stay motivated. Show them how much progress they have made and how close they are to the goal. The visible proximity motivates the final push. For long-term goals where completion is distant, create interim celebrations that act as milestone completions. This provides regular gradient effect boosts rather than requiring sustained motivation across the entire timeline with no boost until the very end. The effect works because completion provides psychological rewards. Finishing something feels good. As you get closer to finishing, Your brain anticipates that good feeling, which motivates increased effort. The anticipation of the reward becomes a reward itself. This is why goals that seem impossibly distant do not motivate. There is no gradient effect, because the goal does not feel closer no matter how much you do. Breaking that distant goal into stages creates multiple gradient effects that maintain motivation across the entire journey. The Hedonic Treadmill. People adapt to both positive and negative changes remarkably quickly, returning to a baseline level of happiness. This is the hedonic treadmill. A promotion makes you happy for a while, then you adapt, and that becomes your new normal. A setback makes you unhappy for a while, then you adapt and return to baseline. Understanding this has several implications. First, chasing happiness through external achievements or acquisitions does not work long-term. Each achievement provides a temporary boost, then you adapt. This does not mean achievement is pointless, but it means seeking lasting happiness through achievement alone is futile. Second, negative events are less devastating than they seem in the moment. You will adapt and feel better than you expect. This does not minimize real suffering but provides perspective. Most setbacks are temporary in their emotional impact, even if their practical consequences persist. Third, you can fight the treadmill by focusing on activities and relationships rather than achievements and possessions. The process of doing engaging activities provides ongoing satisfaction that does not adapt away as quickly as the satisfaction from acquiring things. Relationships also resist adaptation better than material circumstances. Fourth, practicing gratitude can slow adaptation. When you regularly reflect on and appreciate what you have, you counteract the tendency to take it for granted. Gratitude keeps you from fully adapting to positive circumstances. The treadmill effect also suggests that you should be careful about lifestyle inflation. As your income increases, if you increase spending proportionally, you gain no lasting happiness. You adapt to the new level of spending and need even more to feel satisfied. Maintaining some level of spending discipline means that income increases translate to increased security and freedom, rather than just higher spending that provides no lasting satisfaction. Understanding the hedonic treadmill helps you make better decisions about what to pursue and how to find sustainable satisfaction, rather than chasing temporary boosts that inevitably fade. The false consensus effect. People overestimate how much others share their opinions, values, and behaviors. This is the false consensus effect. Whatever you think or do feels normal to you, so you assume it is more common than it actually is. Understanding this helps you avoid assuming others see things the way you do. Different people have genuinely different perspectives, priorities, and reactions. What seems obvious to you might not be obvious to them. When communicating, you need to explain things that seem self-evident because they might not be evident to your audience. The effect creates conflict when people with different views each assume their view is the common one and the other person is being unreasonable. Both people think they represent the mainstream and the other is an outlier. Recognizing that you might be the outlier, or at least that reasonable people can disagree, reduces conflict. You can also exploit this effect. If you want people to adopt a behavior or view, present it as the norm. People want to fit in, so showing that something is common makes it more appealing. This is social proof again, but the false consensus effect means you do not need to show that it is actually common. If you confidently present something as normal, people will tend to believe it is normal because they are prone to false consensus themselves. The effect is stronger for beliefs and behaviors you care deeply about. The more important something is to your identity, the more you assume others share it. This makes it especially hard to understand people who differ from you on core values. Their perspective seems not just wrong but incomprehensible. Stepping back and recognizing that your perspective, however obvious it feels to you, is not universal, helps you understand and communicate with people different from yourself. The false consensus effect also means that understanding what is actually common requires looking beyond your immediate circle. Your friends and chosen communities likely share your views, which reinforces false consensus. Getting input from diverse sources helps correct your perception of what is normal or common. The contrast principle in negotiations. Beyond basic contrast effects, there is a specific application in negotiations where you anchor with your weakest point first, then reveal stronger points sequentially. Each subsequent point seems more reasonable by comparison to what came before. If you are negotiating terms for a project, you might start by establishing the most difficult or expensive element first. Once that is accepted or even just discussed, everything else seems easier by comparison. The initial difficult point sets the scale, and subsequent points get judged relative to it. This is different from leading with your strongest point. Leading with strength establishes credibility, but does not create the same contrast effect. Starting with difficulty or complexity makes everything after it seem simpler and more manageable. The technique requires careful sequencing. You need to know which elements of what you are proposing will seem most challenging and which will seem easier. Lead with challenge, follow with ease. The psychological relief of moving from difficult to easy creates positive momentum in the negotiation. Each concession or point of agreement feels like progress after the difficult start. This works in conflict resolution too. Address the hardest, most contentious issues first. Once you have made progress there, everything else feels comparatively simple. The relationship improves as you move through the easier items, building goodwill and momentum. The risk is that starting with difficulty could derail everything if the other party walks away. This is why you need to frame it properly. You are not demanding acceptance of the difficult point. You are simply putting it on the table for discussion. The goal is to establish the scale, not to force immediate agreement. Once the scale is set, you can negotiate within it. Everything gets judged relative to that initial difficult point, which keeps the overall negotiation within bounds favorable to you. This subtle use of contrast can dramatically improve negotiation outcomes without any deceptive tactics. You are simply choosing an optimal sequence for presenting legitimate points. The door in the face technique. When you want someone to agree to something, start by asking for something much bigger that you know they will refuse. After they say no, wait a moment, then ask for what you actually wanted in the first place. The second request will seem much more reasonable by comparison. This works because people feel a natural urge to compromise after rejecting someone. They feel slightly guilty about saying no, and the smaller request gives them a way to balance that feeling. Sales professionals use this all the time. Someone might first ask you to donate $500 to a charity, and when you refuse, they follow up with a request for just $20. That $20 suddenly feels like nothing compared to $500. The key is making sure your first request is big enough to be rejected, but not so ridiculous that the person thinks you are playing games. There needs to be a logical connection between both requests. This technique works in personal situations too. Asking to borrow a car for a week, then settling for just borrowing it for one afternoon, makes that afternoon seem like a small favor. The principle behind this is called reciprocal concessions. When you back down from your first request, the other person feels socially obligated to meet you halfway. Research shows this technique can double compliance rates compared to just asking for what you want directly. The timing matters though. If you wait too long between requests, the effect weakens. Keep the second request within the same conversation. Also, your tone should remain friendly and understanding when your first request gets rejected. Getting defensive or showing frustration will ruin the entire approach. The person needs to feel that you respect their decision and are simply offering an alternative. This builds trust while still using the contrast principle to your advantage. The technique becomes more powerful when the first request is something you frame as genuinely important. If the person senses you never cared about the first request, they will feel manipulated. The rejection of your first request should cost you something emotionally, even if just a little disappointment, for the technique to maintain its authenticity and effectiveness. Another important element is making the second request seem like a natural compromise rather than something you had planned all along. The transition between requests should feel organic. You might acknowledge their position or show understanding of why they declined before presenting the alternative. This makes the whole interaction feel like a genuine negotiation rather than a scripted manipulation. The foot in the door method. This technique works in reverse to the door in the face method. Start with a tiny request that almost anyone would agree to, then follow up later with a bigger request. Once someone says yes to something small, they are much more likely to say yes to something larger later on. This happens because people want their actions to be consistent with their self-image. After agreeing to help you once, they start seeing themselves as someone who helps you. Saying no to the second request would contradict that new self-image, creating mental discomfort. Research from social psychology experiments demonstrates this clearly. People who agreed to put a small sticker in their window were far more likely to later agree to put a large, ugly sign on their lawn supporting the same cause. The initial small commitment changed how they viewed themselves in relation to that cause. In everyday life, this means asking someone for a small favor first, like asking for directions or borrowing a pen. Later, when you need something bigger, that person is primed to help because they have already helped you before. The time gap between requests matters. If you ask for the second favor immediately, it feels like manipulation. Wait at least a day or two, or even a week for larger requests. The initial request must be small enough that refusing would seem petty or unreasonable. Most people will say yes just to be polite. That initial yes is what opens the door for future requests. This works exceptionally well in workplace settings when building new relationships with colleagues or when trying to gain support for projects. The technique also works for building habits in yourself. Start with a version of the behavior so small that you cannot refuse to do it. Want to start exercising? Begin with just 2 minutes a day. That tiny commitment gets you in the habit, and expanding it later feels natural because you already see yourself as someone who exercises. The psychology here is about identity more than behavior. Each small action is a vote for the type of person you are becoming. When you accumulate enough votes in one direction, your identity shifts, and larger actions that align with that identity become easier. The initial small step is not really about the action itself, but about beginning the process of identity change. This is why the technique is so powerful, and why it works across so many different contexts and situations. The social comparison trap. People constantly compare themselves to others, and these comparisons shape self-esteem and motivation. Understanding this helps you avoid destructive comparisons and use constructive ones. Upward comparison, comparing yourself to someone better off, can be motivating if the gap seems bridgeable and you use them as a model. But if the gap seems impossible to close, upward comparison creates discouragement and resentment. Downward comparison, comparing yourself to someone worse off, can boost self-esteem but also create complacency. The key is being selective about comparisons. Compare yourself to people who are slightly ahead of where you are, close enough that you can learn from them and see a path to their level. Avoid comparing yourself to people so far ahead that the comparison is demoralizing. Also compare yourself to your past self. Are you better than you were last year? This comparison is often more meaningful than comparing yourself to others because everyone is on different paths with different starting points. You can influence others by providing appropriate comparison points. If you want to motivate someone, show them examples of people similar to them who achieved the goal. The similarity makes the achievement seem attainable. If you want to boost someone's confidence, remind them of how far they have come compared to where they started. Social media makes comparison traps worse because you see curated highlights of everyone else's life. People post their best moments, creating an unrealistic comparison baseline. Understanding this helps you resist the trap. What you see is not reality but a selected highlight reel. Comparing your behind-the-scenes reality to someone else's polished public presentation is inherently unfair to yourself. The comparison instinct is deeply human and probably not going away, so the goal is not to eliminate comparison but to make it constructive. Choose your comparison points wisely, and remember that you are seeing incomplete information about others while having complete information about yourself. That imbalance skews comparisons in ways that are usually unfavorable to you. Strategic silence. Most people feel uncomfortable with silence in conversations and rush to fill it, but silence can be one of your most powerful tools. When negotiating or trying to get information, ask your question and then stop talking completely. The other person will feel pressure to fill that silence, often revealing more than they intended. This works because humans are wired to avoid awkward social situations. Silence creates tension, and the easiest way to release that tension is to speak. In negotiations, the person who speaks first after the initial offer often loses ground. If someone makes you an offer, and you just stay silent while looking thoughtful, they will frequently improve the offer without you saying a word. The same principle applies when you want someone to open up emotionally. Instead of jumping in with advice or your own story, just wait quietly. The pause encourages them to dig deeper and share what they are really thinking. Therapists use this technique constantly. In job interviews, after answering a question, resist the urge to keep talking and over-explaining. Let your answer stand and wait for the next question. Many people talk themselves out of jobs by nervously filling silence with unnecessary information. The skill here is being comfortable with that silence yourself. If you look anxious or uncomfortable, the technique loses effectiveness. Practice maintaining a calm, neutral, or slightly interested expression during pauses. Count to 7 in your head if you need to. Most people will break before you reach 7. This technique also makes you appear more confident and in control because you are not rushing or appearing nervous. Silence also gives the other person space to process what has been said. Sometimes people need a moment to think before responding, and filling every pause with more words denies them that opportunity. In heated discussions, a strategic pause can de-escalate tension. Instead of immediately reacting to something that upset you, taking a silent moment lets emotions settle and allows for a more measured response. The power of silence extends beyond just waiting for others to speak. It is also about the quality of presence you bring to conversations. When you are comfortable with silence, you are fully present rather than anxiously planning what to say next. This presence itself improves the quality of communication and connection. Reciprocity. Pressure. When someone does something for you, you feel pressure to return the favor. This urge is incredibly strong, crossing all cultures and societies. Giving someone something, even something small, creates a sense of obligation in them. That obligation can be cashed in later for something you need. The key is giving first, without being asked, and without immediately expecting something in return. The gift or favor should seem unconditional. Free samples work because of reciprocity. Once you accept a free sample, you feel slightly obligated to the person who gave it to you. That makes you more likely to buy something or at least listen to their pitch. The same thing happens with small favors. Holding a door, sharing information, offering help with a task, these all create small debts. When you later need something from that person, they are more inclined to help because of the Reciprocity Principle. The favor you give does not need to be large. Sometimes, small, thoughtful gestures create stronger obligation than big impersonal ones. The timing of when you ask for reciprocation matters. Too soon makes it feel transactional and kills the goodwill. Too late, and the person forgets, or the sense of obligation fades. Generally, waiting a few days to a week works well. You can also build up multiple small favors over time before asking for something larger. This creates an accumulated sense of debt. The person may not consciously track every small thing you did, but they will have a general feeling that you are someone who helps them, which triggers the reciprocity instinct. Be genuine, though. If people sense you are only being nice to manipulate them later, it destroys trust and creates resentment instead of obligation. The reciprocity principle works because societies cannot function without mutual cooperation. The psychological pressure to reciprocate evolved because groups where people returned favors thrived, while groups where people just took without giving back fell apart. This social glue became hardwired into human psychology. The obligation feels real and uncomfortable when unresolved. People actively look for ways to pay back favors to relieve that discomfort. This is why charities that send you unsolicited gifts like address labels or calendars get more donations. The gift creates obligation even though you never asked for it. The principle is so strong that it can override other considerations. People will sometimes reciprocate even when the initial favor was unwanted or when the return favor is much larger than what they received. The key to using this ethically is making sure your initial giving is genuine and that what you eventually ask for is reasonable. The Ambiguity Effect. People avoid options where the probability of good outcomes is unknown, preferring options with known probabilities even when the unknown option might be better. This is the Ambiguity Effect. Known risk feels safer than unknown risk, even when the math suggests otherwise. Understanding this helps you make better decisions by not automatically avoiding ambiguous options. Sometimes the best opportunities are ambiguous. Avoiding all ambiguity means missing them. You can also use this to make offers more attractive by reducing ambiguity. Providing clear information about probabilities and outcomes makes people more comfortable choosing your option. Even if the actual risk is not lower, making it knowable reduces the psychological barrier. The effect is related to control. Known risks feel manageable because you can plan for specific scenarios. Unknown risks feel threatening because you cannot plan. Reducing this feeling means providing whatever information you can about the ambiguous option to make it feel less unknown. The ambiguity effect can work against you when presenting new ideas. New approaches are inherently more ambiguous than existing approaches. People will prefer the familiar option with known characteristics over your new option with unknown characteristics. To overcome this, you need to reduce ambiguity as much as possible through data, examples, and detailed explanation. The more you can make the new option feel knowable, the less the ambiguity effect works against you. You can also frame the existing option as having its own ambiguities. Point out what is uncertain about continuing current approaches. This levels the playing field by making both options seem ambiguous, rather than one being the safe known option and the other being the risky unknown option. Understanding the ambiguity effect helps you recognize when you are avoiding something simply because it is ambiguous, rather than because it is actually worse. Pushing yourself to evaluate ambiguous options more carefully can lead to better decisions, even though your instinct is to avoid them in favor of familiar options with known characteristics. The Bystander Effect. When multiple people witness a problem or emergency, each individual is less likely to take action because they assume someone else will. This is the bystander effect. Responsibility diffuses across the group. Understanding this helps you overcome it. If you need help, do not appeal to a group. Single out a specific person and ask them directly. This eliminates the diffusion of responsibility. They cannot assume someone else will help because you are explicitly asking them. In groups, the bystander effect makes problems persist that no one addresses because everyone assumes someone else will. Being the person who notices this and takes action yourself, or explicitly assigns action to someone specific, overcomes the effect. The effect is strongest when the situation is ambiguous. If everyone is uncertain whether there really is a problem or what should be done about it, they look to others for cues. When everyone is looking to everyone else, no one acts. Making the problem and needed action clear and explicit reduces the bystander effect. You can also use awareness of this effect to understand why help sometimes does not materialize even in clear need. It is not that everyone is callous. It is that a psychological effect makes each person less likely to act when others are present. Once you understand this, You can structure situations to assign clear responsibility to specific individuals, which overcomes the diffusion. In organizational settings, the bystander effect causes problems to fester. Everyone sees the issue but assumes someone else is handling it, or that it is not their responsibility. Creating explicit ownership of problems and clear accountability prevents this. When everyone owns something, no one owns it. When a specific person owns it, it gets addressed. The effect also means that in groups, you need to be more proactive than you think. The presence of others does not mean you can relax because they will handle things. Often everyone is thinking that way, and nothing happens. Being the person who steps up even when others are present is more important than it seems. The Availability Cascade. When people hear something repeatedly, they believe it more, and as more people believe it, even more people hear it, creating a self-reinforcing cascade. This is the Availability Cascade. An idea or concern that gets repeated becomes more available in memory, which makes it seem more important and credible. As it spreads, the fact that many people are talking about it becomes evidence of its importance, which causes even more people to talk about it. You can start a cascade by consistently raising an issue or idea. The repetition itself creates credibility and importance, regardless of the inherent merit. This is how some topics dominate public discussion, while objectively more important issues get ignored. The repeated topic is more available, so it feels more important. Understanding cascades helps you resist them. Just because everyone is talking about something does not mean it is actually the most important thing happening. The cascade creates an illusion of importance through repetition and social proof. Asking whether the attention something receives matches its actual significance helps you avoid being swept along in cascades. You can also use cascades constructively. If you have a message that matters, repeat it consistently across multiple channels. The repetition creates availability, which creates perceived importance, which gets others to repeat it, which creates a cascade. The key is starting with something that has genuine value. Using cascades to amplify something important is different from creating cascades around trivial or false information. The availability cascade explains why media coverage often does not match actual importance. Topics that generate discussion get more coverage, which generates more discussion, which generates more coverage. The cascade is self-reinforcing, independent of the underlying significance of the topic. Being aware of this pattern helps you seek information more deliberately rather than letting cascades determine what you pay attention to. The most discussed topics are not necessarily the most important, and important topics might receive little attention because they have not triggered a cascade. The broken windows theory. Small signs of disorder encourage more disorder. This is the broken windows theory. One broken window that goes unfixed signals that no one cares, which leads to more broken windows and escalating disorder. The same principle applies beyond physical environments. Small violations of standards that go unaddressed signal that standards do not matter, leading to larger violations. You can use this by maintaining small standards consistently. Addressing minor issues prevents them from escalating and prevents larger issues from emerging. The effort to fix the broken window when it first breaks is much less than the effort to fix a whole building of broken windows later. The effect works in reverse too. Signs of order and care encourage more order and care. A well-maintained environment invites people to maintain it. A clean space stays cleaner than a messy space because people do not want to be the first to create mess. You can create this virtuous cycle by establishing order first, then maintaining it consistently. The initial effort to establish order pays off through reduced effort to maintain it. The theory explains why small details matter more than you might expect. One piece of trash on a clean floor is an anomaly that gets picked up. One more piece of trash on a dirty floor just adds to the mess. The context determines whether people add to disorder or help maintain order. In organizations, the same principle applies to behavioral standards. Small violations that go unaddressed signal that standards are not real, leading to larger violations. Consistently addressing even minor issues maintains the standard and prevents escalation. This does not mean being rigidly punitive about small things. It means addressing them constructively and quickly. The key insight is that disorder breeds disorder, and order breeds order. The state you maintain becomes self-reinforcing through the signals it sends about what is acceptable. This means establishing and maintaining good order is easier than letting disorder develop and trying to fix it later. Prevention through maintenance is more effective than repair after breakdown. The contrast misattribution. After experiencing something intense, normal experiences feel either amplified or diminished, depending on the direction of contrast. This goes beyond simple comparison. The brain actually misattributes feelings from one experience to another when they happen close together. If you exercise before a meal, the food tastes better. The good feeling from the exercise gets misattributed to the food. If you watch a scary movie with someone, the arousal from fear can get misattributed as attraction to the person. This is why exciting dates create stronger connection than calm ones. The excitement gets associated with the person, even though the excitement came from the activity. You can use this by pairing experiences strategically. If you want someone to feel more positively about something, pair it with something that creates good feelings. If you want to make a hard task feel easier, do it right after completing something harder. The brain misattributes the relief from finishing the hard thing to the current task seeming easy. The effect requires the experiences to be close together in time. Too much gap and the misattribution does not happen. The brain separates the experiences and attributes feelings correctly. But when experiences are adjacent, the emotional residue from one bleeds into the other. This is why context matters so much for how we experience things. The same conversation feels different depending on what happened right before it. The same task feels different depending on whether you are coming off a success or a failure. You can also use this to shift your own emotional state. If you are in a bad mood, doing something that generates positive emotion, even something unrelated to what is bothering you, can shift your overall state. The positive emotion from the new activity can override or dilute the negative emotion from earlier. The brain is not as good at isolating and tracking emotional sources as we think. Emotions blend and transfer between experiences more than we realize. This creates both vulnerabilities where our judgments get distorted and opportunities where we can strategically influence our own and others' emotional states through careful sequencing of experiences. The curse of knowledge. Once you know something, it becomes hard to remember what it was like not to know it. This is the curse of knowledge. You cannot easily put yourself back in the mindset of someone learning the topic for the first time. This creates communication problems. You skip steps that seem obvious to you but are not obvious to others. You use jargon without defining it because it feels natural to you. You get frustrated when others do not understand things that seem simple to you. Understanding this curse helps you communicate more effectively. When explaining something, consciously think about what the other person does not know yet. Define terms, explain steps that feel obvious, provide context. What feels like over-explaining to you is often just right for someone less familiar with the topic. The curse affects teaching, management, writing, and any situation where you need to explain something you know well. The better you know something, the worse you tend to be at explaining it to beginners unless you consciously compensate for the curse. You can reduce the curse by testing your explanations on people unfamiliar with the topic. Their questions reveal what you are assuming or skipping. You can also try to remember your own experience learning the topic. What confused you at first? What breakthroughs made things click? Those memories help you meet learners where they are. The curse also makes it hard to evaluate how difficult tasks are for others. What you can do quickly might be genuinely hard for someone less experienced. This creates unrealistic expectations and unfair judgments if you do not account for the curse. The effect is frustrating because there is no real solution. You cannot unlearn what you know. You can only consciously compensate by over-explaining and checking understanding more than feels necessary. The effort is worth it because effective communication requires meeting people where they are, not where you are. The commitment and consistency principle. Once people commit to something, especially publicly, they feel strong psychological pressure to follow through and act consistently with that commitment. This need for consistency is one of the deepest human drives. We want our actions to align with our statements and our self-image. You can use this by getting small commitments early. If someone agrees to a principle or makes a statement about what they value, they will feel pressure to act consistently with that later. If someone says they care about the environment, they are more likely to agree to environmentally friendly behaviors later, because refusing would contradict their stated values. Public commitments are more powerful than private ones. When someone makes a statement in front of others, backing away from it feels like losing face. This is why public goal declarations often increase follow-through. You are not just accountable to yourself, but to everyone who heard you commit. Written commitments are more powerful than verbal ones. Something about writing it down makes it feel more real and binding. This is why contracts work, and why writing down goals increases the likelihood of achieving them. The act of writing creates a record that holds you accountable. You can use this on yourself by making small public commitments about the person you want to become. Once you tell others about a goal or value, you feel internal pressure to act consistently with it. The social accountability reinforces your internal motivation. The principle explains why people stick with bad decisions longer than they should. Once they have publicly committed to a course of action, admitting it was wrong feels like admitting they were wrong. The consistency pressure can override contrary evidence. Understanding this helps you recognize when consistency is holding you back from making better decisions. Sometimes, the right choice is to be inconsistent with past commitments when circumstances change. The trick is getting the initial commitment. Once you have that, consistency pressure does much of the work of maintaining behavior over time. This is why the foot in the door technique works so well. That first small commitment creates pressure for larger, consistent actions later. The Decoy Effect. When choosing between two options, people make decisions differently when a third option is introduced, even if they have no intention of choosing that third option. This is the Decoy Effect. The decoy is designed to make one of the original options look more attractive by comparison. Subscription services use this constantly. They offer a cheap basic plan and an expensive premium plan. Most people are torn between the two. Then they add a third option priced just below the premium but with far fewer features. Suddenly, the premium plan looks like great value, because for just a little bit more than the decoy, you get so much more. The decoy is not meant to be chosen. It is there to shift perception of the other options. You see this with popcorn sizes at movie theaters. Small, medium, and large are priced so that large seems like the best deal compared to medium. The medium exists mainly to make large look better. When making decisions, be aware that a third option might be influencing your judgment artificially. Ask yourself what you would choose if that middle option did not exist. When presenting options to others, you can use decoys strategically. If you want someone to pick option A over option B, introduce option C that is similar to A, but clearly inferior. Option A will look better by comparison. The decoy needs to be carefully designed, though. It should be similar enough to your preferred option that comparisons are natural, but inferior enough that choosing it would seem silly. This guides people toward your preferred outcome while still leaving them feeling like they made their own choice. The effect is subtle but powerful, reshaping decisions without people realizing their judgment has been manipulated. The decoy effect works because people are not good at assessing absolute value. We make decisions by comparing the available options. The decoy changes the comparison set in a way that favors one particular choice. Behavioral economists have studied this extensively and found that even when people are told about the decoy effect, they still fall for it. The comparative thinking happens so automatically that conscious awareness does not prevent it. This has implications far beyond consumer purchases. Anytime you are presenting multiple options, The way those options are framed relative to each other matters as much as the actual characteristics of each option. In some cases, adding an option you do not want anyone to choose can be the most effective way to get people to choose what you do want them to choose. The peak end rule. People judge experiences largely based on how they felt at the most intense moment and at the end, rather than the total sum or average of the experience. This is the peak end rule. A long, mostly boring movie with an amazing ending gets remembered as a good movie. A painful medical procedure that ends with less pain gets remembered as less awful than one that ends with more pain, even if the total pain was less in the second one. You can use this when designing experiences for others. Make sure there is at least one peak moment of excellence and that the experience ends on a high note. The middle can be less impressive as long as the peak and end are strong. In customer service, this means resolving issues in a way that leaves people feeling good at the end of the interaction, even if parts of the process were frustrating. The final impression is what sticks. When planning events, meetings, or presentations, put extra effort into creating one memorable moment and ensuring a strong conclusion. The peak does not have to be positive necessarily. Even a peak of intense engagement or surprise can make an experience memorable. But for experiences you want people to remember fondly, make sure the peak is positive. The end is even more important than the peak for overall judgment. An experience that trails off weakly gets remembered worse than one that ends decisively, even if the peak was good. This is why performances, speeches, and presentations need strong endings. Trailing off or ending abruptly leaves people with a weak final impression that colors their memory of the whole thing. You can use this for yourself too. When doing difficult tasks, structure them so they end on a small win rather than petering out. Finish a work session by completing something rather than stopping mid-task. The sense of completion at the end makes the whole session feel more productive. The rule works because memory is constructed, not recorded. When we recall an experience, we do not replay every moment. We reconstruct a summary based on a few key moments. The peak and end are the moments the brain tags as most important for that summary. Understanding this helps you design experiences that create the memories you want people to have, even if the moment-to-moment reality was more mixed. The Overjustification Effect. When you reward people for doing something they already enjoy, they start to enjoy it less. The external reward undermines internal motivation. This is the Overjustification Effect. Activities done for their own sake become work when compensation is added. They become something you do for the reward, rather than for the inherent satisfaction. Understanding this helps you avoid killing motivation. If someone is already motivated, adding rewards can backfire. Instead, support their autonomy and acknowledge their intrinsic motivation. If you need to use rewards, frame them as recognition or bonus rather than payment. The framing matters. A bonus for good work done for its own sake feels different than payment per task. One celebrates achievement, the other makes it transactional. The effect also means you should be careful about turning hobbies into income sources. Something you love doing for free can become a chore when you do it for money. The external motivation crowds out internal motivation. This does not mean never monetize hobbies, but be aware of the risk. Some structure can help. Keep some of the activity purely for yourself, done only for enjoyment with no economic pressure. This maintains internal motivation, even when you also do commercial work. You can use the Overjustification Effect to understand why some incentive systems fail. Adding monetary rewards for things people were already doing can reduce rather than increase the behavior. The rewards make people think, if they are paying me to do this, it must not be enjoyable, and internal motivation dies. The effect is strongest for interesting activities. For boring tasks that no one does for fun, external rewards do not have the same motivation-killing effect because there is no internal motivation to undermine. This means rewards work fine for unpleasant necessary tasks, but are counterproductive for engaging activities people would naturally want to do. Understanding this helps you design better motivation systems that support rather than undermine natural motivation. Mirroring. People naturally feel more comfortable around those who are similar to them. One way to tap into this is by subtly copying the body language of the person you are talking to. If they lean back, you lean back a few seconds later. If they cross their arms, you do the same after a short delay. This creates an unconscious sense of rapport. The brain picks up on these similarities and interprets them as signs of connection and trust. Studies have shown that people who are mirrored during conversations rate the interaction more positively and feel the other person understood them better. Wait a few seconds before copying the gesture so it does not look obvious or mocking. Keep it natural and only mirror positive body language. If someone is displaying closed off or negative postures, mirroring those might reinforce their negative state. This technique works in job interviews, first dates, negotiations, and everyday conversations. Servers who mirror their customers get better tips. Salespeople who mirror potential buyers close more deals. The effect is powerful because it operates below conscious awareness. Most people never notice they are being mirrored, but they walk away feeling like the conversation went well. You can mirror speech patterns too, not just physical gestures. If someone speaks slowly and deliberately, match that pace. If they use certain words or phrases frequently, work those into your responses naturally. The key is subtlety. Overdoing it makes you look like you are mimicking someone, which creates the opposite effect and makes people uncomfortable. Start with 1 or 2 simple mirrors per conversation and build from there. Pay attention to how people respond. Some individuals are more receptive to this than others based on their own self-awareness and communication style. The technique is especially effective when combined with genuine listening and interest in what the other person is saying. Mirroring without actually paying attention to the conversation feels hollow, and people will eventually sense something is off. The best use of mirroring happens when you are genuinely engaged, and the mirroring occurs almost naturally as a side effect of your connection. You are simply becoming more conscious of something that happens automatically between people who are in sync. The more rapport you build through mirroring, the more natural the conversation flows, creating a positive feedback loop. The foot in the door follow-up. Building on the earlier foot in the door technique, there is a powerful follow-up approach. After someone agrees to help you with something small, express genuine appreciation for their specific qualities that made them helpful. This is not just saying thank you. It is labeling them as the kind of person who does this type of thing. Combine the labeling effect with the foot in the door method. After someone gives you directions, you might say something about how you appreciate dealing with someone who takes time to help others. This reinforces their identity as a helpful person. When you later ask for something larger, they are even more likely to agree because you have strengthened their self-image as someone who helps. The appreciation needs to be specific and authentic. Generic thanks do not create the same effect. Reference the actual effort they made and the quality it demonstrates. This approach works especially well when building new relationships where you need ongoing cooperation. Each small favor, followed by specific appreciation that reinforces positive identity, builds a foundation for larger requests later. You are essentially coaching the person to see themselves in a certain way. The more they act in alignment with that identity, the stronger it becomes. This is not manipulation if you genuinely appreciate what they did and want to build a real relationship. It becomes problematic only if you are being insincere and viewing people purely as tools. Done right, both parties benefit. They get genuine appreciation and a clearer positive self-image, and you get help when you need it. The technique accelerates relationship building because it makes your appreciation memorable and tied to identity rather than just being a polite formality that gets forgotten immediately. The combination of behavioral commitment from the small favor plus identity reinforcement from the specific appreciation creates a powerful foundation for ongoing cooperation. The person is not just agreeing to help because they feel obligated. They are agreeing because helping you has become part of how they see themselves. This type of motivation is more reliable and sustainable than obligation alone. It transforms transactional interactions into relationship-building opportunities. Each exchange becomes a chance to reinforce positive identity and deepen connection rather than just a one-off favor that gets forgotten. The Scarcity Principle. Things become more valuable when they are scarce or when availability is limited. This principle drives many marketing tactics, but also shapes human psychology broadly. When something is rare or hard to get, we want it more. When something is abundant and always available, we value it less. You see this with limited time offers and only 3 left in stock messages. These create urgency by suggesting scarcity. The psychological effect is real even when the scarcity is artificial. People do not want to miss out on something that might not be available later. This fear of missing out drives decisions faster than positive attraction often does. You can use this principle in negotiations by making it clear that your offer or availability is limited. If you are available for a meeting only on certain dates, those dates become more valuable than if you seem endlessly available. If you have a skill that few others possess, emphasizing that rarity increases its perceived value. The principle works with information too. Exclusive or insider information feels more valuable than widely known facts, even if the content is similar. The scarcity creates perceived value. Time scarcity works the same way. Busy people often get more respect and have more influence than those who seem to have unlimited time. The busyness signals that their time is valuable and scarce. Be careful not to fabricate false scarcity, though. If people discover you lied about limited availability, it destroys trust. The scarcity needs to be real, or at least plausibly real. The psychological mechanism here relates to loss aversion. Humans are more motivated by avoiding loss than by achieving gain. When something is scarce, it frames the situation as a potential loss. If you do not act now, you might lose the opportunity. This triggers stronger motivation than simply highlighting the benefits of taking action. The scarcity creates urgency that benefit alone cannot generate. Understanding this principle helps you resist manipulative uses of it while also using it authentically when you do have genuine limitations. The Reciprocity Ring. Building on basic reciprocity, the Reciprocity Ring is about creating systems where favors circulate through a group. When you help someone, they feel obligated to help someone else, who helps another person, and eventually good deeds come back to you from unexpected sources. This works because in group settings, people track general patterns of helpfulness rather than specific debts. If you are known as someone who helps others, others will help you, even if they were not the ones you helped directly. You create this by helping people visibly and encouraging them to pass help forward rather than back. Instead of saying, "You can return the favor to me," suggest they help someone else when they get the chance. This spreads goodwill through the network and builds your reputation as a generous person. The Reciprocity Ring works better than direct reciprocity in many contexts because it creates a culture of mutual support rather than transactional exchanges. People feel part of something larger than one-to-one favors. The system is also more robust. If one person cannot help you directly, someone else in the ring can. You are not dependent on any single reciprocity relationship. This approach works especially well in professional networks and communities. Being generous with your time, knowledge, and connections, without tracking who owes you what builds social capital that pays dividends in unexpected ways. People remember your helpfulness and look for opportunities to support you. The key is genuine generosity. If you are calculating about it or obviously building a favor bank, it feels manipulative and the social benefit evaporates. The Reciprocity Ring works best when you are authentically helpful because you value the relationships and the community, with the understanding that this generosity will generally be reciprocated by the group over time. You are investing in the social network as a whole, not in specific bilateral relationships. This creates a resilient support system and a positive reputation that serve you far better than any collection of specific debts would. The pattern interrupt. When someone is in a negative emotional state or locked into a particular mindset, unexpected behavior can snap them out of it. This is called a pattern interrupt. If someone is angry and you respond with gentle humor instead of defensiveness, it disrupts their emotional momentum. They were prepared for a fight, and the unexpected response makes them recalibrate. The key is that the interrupt needs to be surprising but not offensive. The goal is to break the pattern, not escalate the situation. If someone is anxious and spiraling, asking them a completely unrelated question can interrupt the anxiety loop. Their brain has to switch gears to process the new input, which gives the emotional intensity a chance to decrease. In sales and persuasion, pattern interrupts are used when someone is about to say no. Before they can voice their objection, you say something unexpected that captures their attention and changes the direction of the conversation. This does not mean manipulating people out of legitimate concerns. It means creating space for different possibilities to emerge. You can use pattern interrupts on yourself too. When you catch yourself in unhelpful thought patterns, doing something physical and different can break the loop. Standing up, walking outside, or doing an unexpected activity shifts your state. The technique works because mental and emotional patterns have momentum. Once started, they tend to continue unless something disrupts them. The interrupt creates a break point where the pattern loses energy and a new one can begin. The surprise element is crucial. If the interrupt is predictable, it loses effectiveness. This means you cannot use the same interrupt repeatedly with the same person. They will start to expect it, and it will stop working. Variety and genuine unpredictability make pattern interrupts effective. The neuroscience behind this involves breaking automatic response patterns. When we are in familiar situations, our brains run on autopilot, following established neural pathways. A pattern interrupt forces the brain off those automatic pathways and into more conscious, deliberate processing. This shift from automatic to conscious processing is where behavior change becomes possible. In the automatic state, we just react. In the conscious state, we can choose. The interrupt buys you a moment of consciousness before the automatic pattern reasserts itself. In that moment, different choices become available. The Pratfall Effect. Perfect people seem unapproachable and hard to relate to. When you show a minor flaw or make a small mistake, you actually become more likable, not less. This is the Pratfall Effect. The flaw humanizes you and makes others feel more comfortable around you. This only works if you are already perceived as generally competent. If people see you as incompetent, additional mistakes make things worse. But if you have demonstrated skill or success, a small stumble makes you more relatable. Sharing a minor embarrassing story, admitting you do not know something, or making a harmless mistake in front of others can increase rapport. It lowers defenses and makes people feel like you are genuine rather than trying to project false perfection. Job candidates who mention a small weakness they are working on often get rated more favorably than those who claim to have no flaws. The admission signals self-awareness and honesty. In presentations, acknowledging a mistake or a limitation of your proposal makes the rest of your argument seem more trustworthy. You appear objective rather than blindly promotional. Personal relationships benefit from this too. Being willing to be vulnerable and imperfect invites others to do the same, creating deeper connection. The key is keeping the flaw minor, and preferably in an area that does not matter much for the current situation. You want to seem human, not incompetent. A programmer admitting they are not great at design shows humanity without undermining their core skills. Timing matters as well. Demonstrate competence first, then show the flaw. Leading with weakness before establishing credibility can set a negative tone that is hard to overcome. The effect works because perfection creates distance. When someone seems flawless, we assume they cannot understand our struggles or relate to our experiences. A flaw creates a bridge. It says this person is like me. They understand what it is like to mess up or struggle. That commonality builds connection faster than any amount of impressive achievement. The Pratfall Effect also makes your competence seem more authentic. If someone never makes mistakes, we wonder if they are hiding things or presenting a false image. A small mistake confirms that what we are seeing is real. This authenticity is especially valuable in an age where people are skeptical of polished, perfect presentations. Audiences have become sophisticated enough to know that perfection is usually a performance rather than reality. Strategic imperfection signals authenticity in a way that perfection cannot. The Planning Fallacy. People consistently underestimate how long tasks will take, even when they have past experience showing tasks take longer than expected. This is the planning fallacy. You think this time will be different, even though it never is. Understanding this helps you plan more realistically. When estimating how long something will take your initial estimate and multiply it. Double it for small tasks, triple it for large ones. This correction gets you closer to reality than your initial optimistic estimate. The fallacy happens because when planning, you envision the ideal scenario where everything goes smoothly. You do not account for the interruptions, complications, and unexpected issues that always arise. You also tend to remember past successes and forget past delays. You can help others plan better by asking them to consider what could go wrong and how they would handle it. This mental simulation of obstacles makes estimates more realistic. The fallacy has a complementary effect called the completion bias. People overestimate how much they have accomplished and underestimate how much remains. You think you are 80% done when you are really 50% done. This creates compounding estimation errors. The initial estimate is too optimistic, then the estimate of remaining work is also too optimistic. Recognizing these patterns helps you build in buffers. Professional project managers use standard multipliers based on experience. A task estimated at 10 hours gets scheduled for 15 or 20 hours. This seems like padding, but it just compensates for the planning fallacy. The result is more accurate timelines. Understanding the planning fallacy also helps you be more patient with others. When people miss deadlines, it is often not because they are lazy or lying. They genuinely believe their estimates, which were genuinely wrong due to the planning fallacy. Building this understanding into how you work with others reduces frustration and conflict while improving planning accuracy. The negativity bias. Bad is stronger than good. Negative experiences have more impact than equivalent positive experiences. This is negativity bias. A criticism hurts more than an equivalent compliment helps. A loss feels worse than an equivalent gain feels good. A negative interaction affects your view of a person more than a positive interaction. Understanding this helps you in relationships and communication. You cannot balance one negative interaction with one positive. You need multiple positives to outweigh one negative. Research suggests about 5 positive interactions to balance one negative in relationships. This is why being generally nice does not compensate for occasional meanness. The occasional meanness dominates. You can use this defensively by avoiding creating negative experiences. One thoughtless comment can damage a relationship more than months of kindness built up. Being mindful of the potential negative impact of your words and actions helps you avoid causing disproportionate harm. The bias also affects decision-making. Potential losses loom larger than potential gains, making you overly cautious. Understanding this helps you take appropriate risks rather than being paralyzed by loss aversion. In presenting ideas, frame things in terms of avoiding losses rather than achieving gains when possible. The loss framing triggers stronger motivation due to negativity bias. You can also use understanding of negativity bias to not take negative feedback too hard. Your emotional response will be strong because of negativity bias, but that does not mean the feedback is more important or true than positive feedback. Both deserve consideration, but negativity bias makes you overweight the negative. Consciously adjusting your reaction helps maintain balanced self-assessment. The bias exists because in evolutionary terms, Avoiding bad outcomes was more critical for survival than achieving good outcomes. An ancestor who missed an opportunity for extra food lived. An ancestor who missed a threat died. This made us hypersensitive to negative information. In modern contexts, this sensitivity is often counterproductive, but understanding it helps you compensate for it in yourself and account for it in others. The peak shift effect. After experiencing extremes, normal stimuli feel more intense in the opposite direction. This goes beyond simple contrast. The experience of an extreme recalibrates your baseline. After being in the cold, room temperature feels warm. After intense stress, normal life feels peaceful. You can use this by strategically exposing yourself to controlled extremes. After doing something very difficult, regular challenges feel easier. Athletes train beyond competition intensity so that competition feels manageable. If you practice public speaking with a timer running at double speed, speaking at normal pace feels easy. The extreme training shifts your perception of what is normal or difficult. You can also use this in negotiations or persuasion. If you can shift someone's reference point by exposing them to an extreme option or situation, their evaluation of normal options changes. After considering a very expensive option, moderate prices seem reasonable. After hearing an extreme position, moderate positions seem more acceptable. The key is that the extreme experience needs to be real, not hypothetical. Actually experiencing something extreme has the recalibration effect. Just imagining it or hearing about it has much less impact. The peak shift is temporary. Your baseline gradually adjusts back to normal if you return to normal conditions. This means you need to maintain some exposure to extremes if you want the shifted baseline to persist. This is why athletes periodically push to new intensity levels in training. It maintains the shifted perception, where competition feels manageable. The effect also works negatively. If you regularly experience comfortable, easy conditions, normal challenges feel difficult. You can become soft without realizing it because your baseline shifted downward. Maintaining some exposure to difficulty keeps your baseline calibrated so that normal challenges remain manageable. Understanding peak shift helps you design training and preparation. Push beyond what you will actually face so that the actual situation feels comparatively easy. This mental edge from shifted baselines can make the difference in performance under pressure. The illusion of choice. People feel more satisfied with decisions when they believe they had choices, even if all the options lead to similar outcomes. When you need someone to do something, presenting it as a choice between two acceptable options works better than giving a single directive. Instead of saying we need to meet Tuesday, ask, would Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday morning work better for you? The outcome is the same. You are meeting early in the week, but framing it as a choice creates buy-in. The person feels they had control over the decision. This works especially well with children, but adults respond to it too. Both options need to be genuinely acceptable to you. If you secretly prefer one and show disappointment when they pick the other, the illusion breaks down. When used authentically, this technique reduces resistance and increases cooperation. People are less likely to push back against decisions they feel they participated in making. The effect is powerful in negotiations. Instead of demanding your preferred terms, present a couple of options that all meet your core needs but differ in less important details. The other party feels they are negotiating and making real choices, even though all paths lead to outcomes you can accept. This also works for self-management. When you are struggling to start a task, give yourself a choice between two different ways to begin. Should I start with research or outlining? Either way, you are starting, but framing it as a choice reduces the resistance your brain puts up against being told what to do. The autonomy, created by choice, even limited choice, is psychologically important. People tolerate restrictions better when they feel they have some control over how those restrictions play out. The illusion of choice is only manipulative if the choices are fake, or if you are using it to get people to do things against their interests. When the choices are real and all lead to mutually beneficial outcomes, it is simply good communication design. You are structuring the interaction in a way that respects the other person's need for autonomy while still guiding toward productive outcomes. The technique acknowledges a fundamental human need for self-determination. Even in situations where options are constrained, people want to feel they have some agency. Providing that sense of choice, even within limits, satisfies that need and makes cooperation easier. The Identifiable Victim Effect. People care more about specific identified individuals than about statistical groups, even when the group represents more total suffering. One child in need with a name and face generates more sympathy and donations than statistics about thousands of children in similar circumstances. This is the Identifiable Victim Effect. You can use this when advocating for causes or seeking support. Instead of citing statistics, tell one specific story. Give details that make the situation personal and concrete. The emotional connection to one identifiable case motivates action more than abstract numbers. This happens because our emotional systems evolved to respond to individuals we could see and interact with. Statistics and large groups are abstractions that do not trigger the same emotional response. The specific story creates mental images and emotional connections that statistics cannot. The effect works in the opposite direction, too. When you want to reduce emotional reaction, use statistics and aggregates instead of personal stories. This is why organizations discussing difficult topics often present data rather than individual cases. The data creates emotional distance that allows rational discussion. Understanding this effect helps you resist manipulation. Advocacy organizations exploit the Identifiable Victim Effect by showing you specific cases to generate emotional responses and donations. The emotional response is real, and the causes may be legitimate, but recognizing the technique helps you make more considered decisions about where to direct your resources. You can also use this effect ethically. If you are working on something that helps people, showing specific examples of who benefits and how makes your work more compelling, you are not fabricating anything, just presenting real information in a way that connects emotionally rather than staying abstract. The effect reveals something fundamental about human psychology. We are built for small-scale social groups where everyone was an individual you knew. Large-scale abstract thinking about groups of thousands or millions does not engage our emotions the same way. This creates challenges in addressing large-scale problems, but also opportunities for communicating about those problems more effectively through individual stories. The Fresh Start Effect. People are more motivated to pursue goals and make changes after temporal landmarks like the start of a new week, month, year, or after birthdays and other significant dates. These moments feel like fresh starts, where past failures can be left behind and new patterns begun. This is why gym memberships spike in January, and why starting Monday is such a common phrase. The psychological fresh start helps people mentally separate from past failures. It creates a sense of a new chapter where old patterns do not have to continue. You can use this intentionally, rather than waiting for major calendar events. Create your own fresh start moments. Completing a project can mark a transition point. Moving to a new location, starting a new role, or even just changing your environment can trigger the fresh start effect. When you want to build a new habit or break an old one, time it with one of these natural transition points. The momentum is stronger than trying to change mid-flow. People also hold themselves more accountable to goals set at fresh start moments. A resolution made on January 1st feels more binding than a goal set on a random Wednesday in March. You can manufacture this feeling by creating personal ceremonies or markers that signal a new beginning. The effect wears off over time, though. That initial motivation fades as the fresh start becomes the new normal. The key is using that initial burst of motivation to establish systems and routines that can maintain the change after the emotional boost fades. Do not rely on motivation alone. Use the fresh start to build structure. The combination of heightened motivation plus deliberate system design creates lasting change more reliably than motivation alone ever could. The fresh start effect works because it gives your brain permission to discard old identity and patterns. Humans are very attached to consistency and past behavior. We tend to think, this is just how I am, which makes change feel impossible. A fresh start disrupts that narrative. It says the old patterns belong to a previous chapter, and this new chapter can be different. This mental separation from the past is powerful. It frees you from the weight of previous failures and creates space for new possibilities. The challenge is that most fresh starts do not actually come with changed circumstances. You are still the same person, in mostly the same situation. The calendar changed, but your environment, habits, and challenges did not. This is why fresh start motivation fades quickly, unless you use it to build real structural changes that outlast the initial enthusiasm. The default effect. People are much more likely to stick with default options than to actively choose alternatives. Whatever is presented as the default becomes the path of least resistance. This inertia is powerful. Opt-out systems have much higher participation than opt-in systems, even when the effort to participate is identical. This is why organ donation rates are much higher in countries where you have to opt out rather than opt in. The default is donating, so most people stick with it. You can use this by making your preferred option the default. When presenting choices, set up the decision so that what you want to happen occurs automatically unless someone takes action to change it. In work settings, if you want a particular approach to be standard, make it the default procedure that happens unless someone specifically requests an alternative. The burden of action falls on those who want something different, and most people will not make that effort. The same principle applies to habits and routines. Whatever you do automatically becomes the default. Changing requires conscious effort. This is why breaking bad habits is hard. The bad habit is the default path your brain follows unless you actively intervene. To change this, you need to disrupt the automatic pattern and establish a new default. The default effect works because humans are cognitive misers. We avoid mental effort when possible. Making a choice requires thinking and deciding. Accepting the default requires nothing. Given the choice between something requiring effort and something requiring no effort, most people choose no effort most of the time. This is not laziness necessarily. It is efficient resource allocation. We only have so much mental energy, so we conserve it by not making unnecessary decisions. The problem is that this makes us vulnerable to whoever sets the defaults. Defaults are rarely neutral. Someone chose what the default would be, and that choice shapes outcomes dramatically. Being aware of this helps you notice when defaults are being used to influence you. It also helps you design better systems by thinking carefully about what should be default behavior. The Endowment Effect. People value things more once they own them. The same item seems more valuable when it is yours than when you are considering buying it. This is the Endowment Effect. Ownership creates attachment that increases perceived value. This is why trial periods and free samples work so well. Once you have something in your possession, even temporarily, giving it up feels like a loss. You start to see it as yours, and loss aversion kicks in. Retailers use this with return policies. They know most people will not return items once they take them home, because the endowment effect makes returning feel like losing something. You can use this principle when selling by getting the item into the buyer's hands. Let them hold it, try it, take it home on trial. Physical possession increases the sense of ownership and makes purchase more likely. In negotiations, frame what you are offering in terms of what the other party will own rather than what they are buying. Shift focus to the end state of ownership rather than the transaction of purchase. This activates the endowment effect in advance. The effect works with ideas and positions too. Once someone takes a position publicly, they become attached to it. Arguing against their position feels like attacking something they own. This is why people defend their opinions so vigorously, even when evidence contradicts them. The opinion has become part of their psychological territory. Understanding this helps you introduce ideas more effectively. Instead of presenting a complete idea and asking people to accept it, guide them to generate the idea themselves, or at least feel like they contributed to it. Once they feel ownership of the idea, they will defend and promote it as if it were their own. The endowment effect can work against you too. Holding on to things, positions, or relationships too long because you own them already. Just because you have invested in something does not mean continuing is the right choice. The past investment is gone regardless. The only question is whether continuing makes sense going forward. This is where the endowment effect creates sunk-cost fallacy, the focusing illusion. Whatever you focus on becomes disproportionately important in your evaluation. This is the focusing illusion. When answering questions about happiness, people overweight whatever aspect the question draws attention to. If asked about their car before asked about life satisfaction, their feelings about their car disproportionately influence their answer about life satisfaction. The act of focusing on something makes it seem more important than it actually is in the full context of your life. You can use this both to influence others and to avoid being influenced. To influence others, direct their attention to aspects that favor your position before asking for a decision. If you want someone to approve a project, first discuss recent problems that the project would solve. This makes those problems salient, and the project gets evaluated in that context. To avoid being influenced, notice what is being emphasized, and ask yourself what is not being discussed. Broadening your focus beyond what others are highlighting helps you make more balanced decisions. The illusion also affects your own happiness and satisfaction. When you focus repeatedly on what is missing or wrong in your life, those things dominate your evaluation of your overall well-being. When you focus on what is going well, those positive aspects become more salient and your overall satisfaction increases. This is not about ignoring problems, but about maintaining balanced attention. Problems need focus when you are solving them, but they should not dominate your overall life evaluation. The focusing illusion explains why lifestyle changes often do not improve happiness as much as expected. Before the change, you focus on how that change will improve things. After the change, you stop focusing on it, and attention shifts to other aspects of life. The initial boost fades as focus shifts. Understanding this helps set realistic expectations about what changes will actually improve your life. The things you think about constantly will matter more than things you rarely consider, regardless of their objective importance. This means you can shift what matters in your life by deliberately shifting what you focus on regularly. This is not self-deception, but recognition that importance is partly constructed through attention rather than being purely objective. The Contrast Principle. When you experience two things in sequence, you judge the second one relative to the first, rather than on its own merits. Something can seem cheap or expensive, easy or difficult, attractive or unattractive depending entirely on what came right before it. Businesses exploit this constantly. Car salespeople sell you the car first, then bring up accessories and upgrades. Spending $2,000 on upgrades feels small, right after committing to a $30,000 car purchase. If they had led with the accessories, $2,000 would feel huge. Restaurants list expensive items at the top of the menu, even if few people order them. These items make everything else seem reasonably priced by comparison. You can use this in everyday situations. If you need to share bad news followed by less bad news, the second piece of news will seem better than it actually is. If you have to complete an unpleasant task, do it right after something even worse. It will feel easier. When asking for favors, start with the difficult aspects of what you need, then explain how you will make it easier. The help you offer will seem more valuable because of the contrast with the initial difficulty. Physical experiences work this way too. Putting your hand in warm water feels different depending on whether you just had it in cold water or hot water. The same temperature produces opposite sensations based purely on contrast. The effect resets if too much time passes between the two experiences. The items need to be close together for your brain to automatically compare them. Understanding this helps you structure presentations, proposals, and even daily routines to make the outcomes feel more favorable through strategic sequencing. The principle also applies to effort and difficulty. A moderately challenging task feels much easier if you tackle it right after completing something very difficult. Athletes use this in training, following hard workouts with moderate ones, to make the moderate sessions feel almost easy by comparison. Teachers sequence lesson difficulty to keep students engaged, following challenging material with something more accessible to maintain confidence. The contrast principle is deeply rooted in how our sensory and cognitive systems work. We do not perceive absolute values well. We are much better at detecting differences and changes. This made evolutionary sense because noticing changes in your environment was more important for survival than knowing absolute values. A slight movement in the bushes mattered more than knowing the exact color of those bushes. This perceptual system carries over into how we judge value, price, difficulty, and nearly every other dimension of experience. The anchoring adjustment. After an anchor is set, people adjust from it, but they adjust insufficiently. They move toward the correct answer but do not move far enough, leaving them still influenced by the anchor. Understanding this helps you in negotiations. Even when the other party recognizes your initial anchor is high and adjusts downward, they will not adjust far enough. The final result stays higher than if you had not anchored high. The same works in reverse. When you see an anchor, consciously adjust further than feels natural. Your instinct will be to adjust some amount, but that instinct produces insufficient adjustment. Force yourself to adjust more. The anchoring adjustment effect is why negotiations rarely end at objective fair value. Both parties anchor on their own positions and adjust insufficiently toward the middle. The final result depends on whose anchor was established more strongly. You can reduce the effect by avoiding exposure to anchors when possible. If you are buying something, research value independently before seeing asking prices. If you need to evaluate something, form your estimate before hearing others' estimates. The anchor only influences you if you are exposed to it. When you must deal with anchors, explicitly calculate what you think is correct, independent of the anchor, then use that as your position. Do not start from the anchor and adjust. Start from your independent evaluation. The anchoring adjustment effect shows how sticky initial numbers are. Even when we know they are biased, even when we consciously try to correct, we do not correct enough. The only reliable way to avoid anchor influence is to avoid the anchor entirely by forming judgments before exposure. This is not always possible, but when it is, the effort to form independent judgments first pays off in better decisions that are not skewed by arbitrary initial numbers. The choice overload effect. Having many options sounds good, but too many choices actually reduces decision-making quality and satisfaction. This is choice overload. When faced with dozens of options, people either fail to choose at all or make worse choices and feel less satisfied with them. You can use this by limiting the options you present to others. 3 to 5 choices is usually optimal. More than that and decision quality decreases. When selling, offering fewer options increases purchase rates. When presenting recommendations, limiting options makes decision-making easier. The paradox is that people say they want more choices, but their behavior shows that fewer choices leads to better outcomes. The effect happens because each option requires mental effort to evaluate. Beyond a certain point, the effort exceeds capacity, and decision-making breaks down. People either give up or use simplistic heuristics that lead to poor choices. You can also structure choices to reduce overload. Group similar options into categories, present choices sequentially rather than simultaneously, or provide a recommended default. These techniques preserve meaningful choice while reducing cognitive load. Understanding choice overload helps you design better decision processes for yourself too. When facing too many options, narrow down to a manageable set before doing detailed evaluation. Use rough filters to eliminate clearly inferior options quickly, Then carefully evaluate only the remaining few. The effect reveals a limitation in human cognition. We are not built to evaluate dozens of options systematically. Our evolutionary environment had limited choices, and our decision-making systems reflect that. In modern contexts, with abundant options, these systems get overwhelmed. Recognizing this helps you design around the limitation rather than fighting it. Fewer good options presented well beats many options presented poorly. The goal is not maximum choice, but optimal choice architecture that leads to good decisions people feel satisfied with. The authority principle. People are more likely to comply with requests from authority figures, or those perceived as experts. This goes beyond just following orders from bosses or officials. Even symbols of authority like titles, credentials, uniforms, or confident demeanor increase compliance. You can establish authority by demonstrating expertise, citing credentials, or simply projecting confidence in your domain. When you show that you know what you are talking about, people are more inclined to follow your suggestions. This is why doctors, lawyers, and other professionals display their degrees. The credentials serve as authority signals. In situations where you lack formal credentials, you can build authority through demonstration. Show your expertise through actions and results, rather than just claiming it. People will defer to demonstrated competence even without official titles. The principle has a dark side too. The famous Milgram experiments showed that people will do things they find morally wrong if an authority figure tells them to. Understanding this helps you resist inappropriate authority and question whether compliance makes sense in context. To use this ethically, only claim authority in areas where you genuinely have expertise. False authority is manipulative and eventually gets exposed. Real authority, backed by actual knowledge and results, creates trust and makes influence easier. The authority does not have to be yours personally. Citing recognized authorities in your field strengthens your arguments. If experts agree with your position, mention them. This borrowed authority adds credibility to your claims. Physical symbols matter too. Dressing professionally in contexts where that is the norm increases perceived authority. The way you carry yourself, your tone of voice, and your willingness to take decisive action all contribute to authority presence. The principle works because humans evolved in hierarchical social structures, where following recognized leaders usually led to better outcomes than constant disagreement and chaos. Deference to authority became an adaptive shortcut. In modern contexts, this instinct persists, even when the authority might not actually know better than you do. The Zeigarnik Effect. Unfinished tasks stick in your memory much better than completed ones. Your brain keeps incomplete things active in your working memory, creating a kind of mental tension that pushes you to finish them. You can use this in several ways. When studying or learning something new, stop in the middle of a section rather than at a natural ending point. This keeps your brain engaged with the material even after you stop actively studying. When you come back to it later, you will remember more and pick up faster because your brain never fully let go of it. This same principle explains why cliffhangers in television shows are so effective. The unresolved story creates mental tension that makes you keep thinking about it. In work situations, if you need to remember to follow up on something, start it but do not finish it. Your brain will keep nudging you about it until you complete it. This acts like a natural reminder system. The effect works because completion gives your brain permission to forget. Once something is done, your brain files it away and moves on. But incomplete tasks stay active and accessible. You can also use this when persuading others. End a conversation or presentation right before the natural conclusion. Leave one point unresolved or one question unanswered. The other person will keep thinking about it afterward, often coming to the conclusion you wanted them to reach on their own. When people arrive at conclusions themselves, rather than being told directly, they believe them more strongly. The tension of incompletion makes the brain work to resolve it, and that active processing creates stronger memory and conviction than passive reception of complete information ever could. Writers use this effect by stopping their work mid-sentence at the end of a writing session. The incomplete thought pulls them back to the work the next day and makes starting easier. The brain wants to complete that sentence, so sitting down to write feels less like starting from zero. You can apply this to any creative or intellectual work. Leave yourself in the middle of something interesting rather than pushing through to a stopping point. The lingering mental engagement makes the work feel less like a chore when you return to it. The effect has limits, though. If you have too many incomplete tasks, the mental burden becomes overwhelming rather than helpful. Your brain can only maintain so many open loops before it starts dropping them or becoming anxious about the sheer volume of unfinished business. The key is using strategic incompletion for the tasks that matter most while closing loops on less important items. The IKEA Effect. People value things more when they have put effort into creating them. This is called the IKEA Effect, after the furniture that requires assembly. The effort of assembly creates attachment and perceived value beyond what the same item would have if it came pre-assembled. You can use this by involving people in creating or shaping what you are offering. When people contribute to developing an idea, they become invested in its success. Their effort creates ownership. In work settings, asking for input and incorporating feedback makes people feel like the final product is partly theirs, which increases their support for it. The key is that the effort needs to be successful. If someone tries to build something and fails, they do not develop attachment. The effort must result in completion for the effect to work. This is why projects with clear progress milestones are more engaging. Each completed milestone creates a small IKEA effect. You can also use this when selling. Letting customers customize or personalize products increases perceived value. The effort of customization, even if minor, creates attachment. The same product feels more valuable when you chose the color, added your initials, or configured it yourself. The effect works for ideas too. When people help develop an idea through discussion and contribution, they become advocates for it. The idea becomes partially theirs through their creative effort. This is far more powerful than presenting a complete idea and asking people to accept it. Understanding this helps you get more value from your own efforts too. Projects you build yourself feel more valuable than identical things you buy. This is not irrational. The skill development and sense of agency from building have real value beyond the end product. The effect can backfire, though. If you invest enormous effort into something that does not work out, the attachment created by effort makes it harder to abandon. You become irrationally committed to something because you built it, even when it would be better to move on. Recognizing when IKEA effect attachment is clouding your judgment about whether to continue something is a valuable skill. The fundamental attribution error. When others behave badly, you attribute it to their character. When you behave badly, you attribute it to circumstances. This is the fundamental attribution error. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and you think they are a bad driver or rude person. You cut someone off and you think the situation forced you to do it. Understanding this bias helps you be more fair and less judgmental. When someone does something wrong, consider what circumstances might have led to that behavior before assuming it reflects their character. Most people are trying to do their best given their situation and constraints. Behavior that looks unreasonable from outside might make sense given what they are dealing with. You can also use awareness of this error to understand why others judge you more harshly than you judge yourself. They see your actions without full context and attribute it to character. Explaining the circumstances helps correct their attribution. When you make a mistake, briefly mentioning the circumstances helps others understand without sounding like you are making excuses. The error creates conflicts when both parties commit it simultaneously. Each person attributes their own behavior to circumstances and the other person's behavior to character. Both feel misunderstood, and both think the other is unreasonable. Breaking this cycle requires consciously attributing charity to others' behavior while taking responsibility for your own. Assume others face constraints you do not see, and acknowledge your own role in problems rather than blaming circumstances. The error is called fundamental because it is so pervasive and hard to overcome. It reflects a deep asymmetry in how we have information about ourselves versus others. We know our circumstances and constraints intimately. We have limited visibility into others' circumstances. This information asymmetry makes the error almost inevitable without conscious correction. Training yourself to ask about circumstances before judging character is a learnable skill that improves relationships and reduces conflict. The Dunning-Kruger Effect. People with low ability in a domain tend to overestimate their competence, while experts often underestimate theirs. This is the Dunning-Kruger Effect. When you know very little, you do not know enough to recognize what you do not know. This creates false confidence. As you learn more, you become aware of the vastness of what you do not know, which can create insecurity even as your actual competence increases. Understanding this helps you in several ways. First, be suspicious of your own confidence in areas where you lack experience. That confidence might be false confidence, born of ignorance. Second, when you feel insecure despite having experience, recognize that might be a sign of competence. Experts know how much they do not know. Third, when evaluating others, be aware that the most confident person might not be the most competent. Genuine experts often express uncertainty and nuance, while novices make confident sweeping statements. The effect creates problems in decision-making. Groups often defer to whoever seems most confident, but that person might be overconfident due to lack of knowledge. Creating space for people to express uncertainty and valuing careful, nuanced thinking over confident declarations helps counteract this. You can also use awareness of this effect to communicate more effectively. If you are an expert, expressing appropriate uncertainty makes you more credible to other experts, even if it makes you seem less confident to novices. Finding the right balance depends on your audience. The effect is not about intelligence. Smart people fall victim to it in domains where they lack experience. Being smart can even make it worse, because you can construct plausible-sounding explanations for things you do not actually understand, fooling yourself more thoroughly. The path out of the valley of false confidence requires learning enough to recognize what you do not know. This often creates a period of uncomfortable awareness of incompetence before you build enough skill to regain confidence on a more solid foundation. Understanding this trajectory helps you persist through the uncomfortable middle phase, where you know enough to recognize your gaps, but not yet enough to fill them. The Optimism Bias. People tend to believe they are less likely than average to experience negative events, and more likely to experience positive events. This is optimism bias. You think you are less likely to get sick, have accidents, or face setbacks than statistics suggest. Understanding this bias helps you plan more realistically. Your instinct is to underestimate risks and overestimate your chances of success. Correcting for this means taking threats more seriously and making success harder to achieve than you initially think. The bias has benefits. Optimism drives action and persistence. If people accurately assessed how difficult things are and how likely failure is, they might never try. Optimism bias creates the confidence to attempt difficult things, but uncorrected optimism leads to inadequate preparation and poor decisions. The key is maintaining optimism for motivation while planning as if you are not special. Assume you face the same odds as everyone else when making plans, even while believing you can beat those odds. This gives you realistic plans backed by optimistic motivation. You can use optimism bias in others when trying to motivate action. People naturally believe they can succeed, so you do not need to convince them success is likely. You need to provide a path and remove obstacles. Their bias already makes them optimistic about their chances. The flip side is that people underestimate how long things will take and how much they will cost. This combines optimism bias with planning fallacy to create systematically wrong estimates. Compensating for both biases means multiplying time and cost estimates significantly. The optimism bias also makes people underinvest in prevention and insurance. The bad thing probably will not happen to you, so why pay to prevent it? This logic fails statistically. Some percentage of people do experience bad outcomes, and you have no special immunity. Rational planning means insuring against risks, even though optimism bias makes that insurance feel unnecessary. Understanding your own optimism bias helps you make better decisions while maintaining the motivational benefits of positive expectations. You can be optimistic in spirit while pessimistic in planning, getting benefits of both mindsets. The rhyme as reason effect. Phrases that rhyme are perceived as more true and more insightful than equivalent non-rhyming phrases. This is the rhyme as reason effect. The fluency of rhyme creates an impression of truth. You can use this by crafting key messages to rhyme when possible. The rhyme makes them more memorable and more believable. This is why so many proverbs and sayings rhyme. The rhyme makes them feel wise and true, even when the content is questionable. Understanding this effect helps you resist being overly persuaded by rhyming phrases. Just because something rhymes does not make it true. Evaluate the content independently of the form. The effect works because rhymes are easier to process. Processing fluency creates a feeling of rightness that gets misattributed to truth. This is the same mechanism as the fluency heuristic but specific to rhyme. You can use rhyming for teaching and memory. Information presented in rhyme is remembered better than the same information without rhyme. The rhyme provides structure that aids recall. This is why children's educational content uses rhyme so heavily. The effect is not just about memory. Rhyme actually changes perceived truth and wisdom. Legal arguments presented with rhyming phrases are rated as more convincing. Marketing slogans that rhyme are more effective. The content might be identical, but the rhyme makes it land differently. The rhyme as reason effect shows how form affects content perception. You cannot separate what is said from how it is said. The packaging changes the message even when the information is identical. Understanding this makes you a more sophisticated consumer of information and a more effective communicator. Use form to enhance true and important content. Resist being swayed by good form wrapped around weak content. The key is recognizing when form is doing work that content should be doing. If something feels true mainly because it rhymes or sounds good, that is a warning sign to examine the actual substance more carefully. The present bias. People value immediate rewards more than future rewards, even when the future rewards are substantially larger. This is present bias. $100 today feels better than $110 next month, even though rationally you should prefer the larger amount. Understanding present bias helps you make better long-term decisions. Your instinct is to choose immediate gratification over future benefits. Compensating for this bias means forcing yourself to consider long-term consequences as carefully as immediate outcomes. You can fight present bias with commitment devices. Pre-commit to future actions when you are thinking clearly, rather than relying on willpower in the moment. Automatically saving money before you can spend it overcomes present bias better than trying to resist spending money you have access to. The bias is stronger when choices feel abstract. Making future consequences vivid and concrete reduces present bias. Instead of thinking about retirement as abstract future comfort, think about specific activities you want to do and calculate what you need to make them possible. The concreteness makes future rewards feel more real and immediate. You can use present bias in others when you want immediate action. Emphasize immediate benefits and downplay delayed costs. This is how predatory lending works. The immediate cash feels good. The future payments feel abstract and distant. The opposite works when you want to discourage immediate action. Emphasize immediate costs and make future benefits feel abstract. Present bias is why people struggle with diet, exercise, saving, and other domains where immediate actions have delayed consequences. The immediate experience dominates, even when long-term consequences are more important. Creating systems that align immediate and long-term incentives helps. Finding ways to make healthy behaviors immediately rewarding overcomes present bias better than relying on motivation from delayed health benefits. Understanding present bias helps you design your life and choices around it rather than fighting it with willpower. Willpower fails against present bias. Systems that make good long-term choices also good short-term choices succeed. The clustering illusion. Random patterns often appear to contain meaningful clusters when in reality they are random. This is the clustering illusion. You see patterns in randomness because the human brain is wired to find patterns. A random sequence of coin flips will contain streaks of heads or tails that feel non-random but are actually expected in random data. Understanding this helps you avoid seeing meaning in noise. Just because something looks like a pattern does not mean there is an underlying cause. Sometimes, randomness creates pattern-like appearances. In investing, sports, and many other domains, people see hot streaks and imagine they have found a signal when they are just seeing noise. Testing whether patterns persist or are just random requires more data and statistical thinking. The illusion creates superstitions. You do something and a good outcome follows. You imagine a connection when it was just chance. Repeating the behavior seems to work sometimes because random outcomes will occasionally coincide with the behavior, reinforcing the false belief. You can protect yourself by understanding how randomness works. Small samples especially are unreliable. A few successes or failures tell you almost nothing. You need large samples to distinguish signal from noise. The illusion also makes storytelling easy. You can always find some pattern in past events and construct a narrative about why things happened. The narrative feels explanatory but might just be retrofitting a story onto random events. Being skeptical of clean, simple stories helps. Reality is usually messier than the stories we tell about it. The clustering illusion is hard to overcome because seeing patterns was so valuable evolutionarily. The cost of missing a real pattern was high. The cost of seeing a false pattern was low. This made us err toward seeing patterns even when they are not there. In modern contexts with lots of data, this tendency creates problems. Data mining will always find apparent patterns in large data sets. The question is whether patterns are real or just clustering illusion. Proper statistical testing helps, but even then, the human tendency is to believe the patterns we see. The Google Effect. When you know information is easily accessible externally, you are less likely to remember it. This is the Google Effect. Your brain does not bother storing information it knows can be quickly retrieved. Understanding this helps you decide what to memorize versus what to look up. For information you need frequently, or that forms the foundation for deeper understanding, memorization still matters. For details you need rarely. Relying on external sources is efficient. The effect changes how you should learn. Instead of trying to memorize everything, focus on understanding structures and knowing where to find details. Your brain becomes organized around access to information rather than storage of information. This is not necessarily bad if you are conscious about it. The risk is becoming unable to think deeply about topics because you lack the foundational knowledge and memory. Deep thinking requires having relevant information readily accessible in your mind, not requiring constant lookups. You can compensate by memorizing key concepts and frameworks while looking up specific details. The framework in memory lets you think, while the ability to retrieve details lets you work without memorizing everything. The Google Effect also affects what you pay attention to. When you know you can look something up later, you pay less attention in the moment. This can mean missing important context or nuance that does not get captured in your later lookup. Being intentional about what you memorize and what you externalize helps you get the benefits of external memory without losing the benefits of internal memory. The effect is accelerating as external information becomes more accessible. Smartphones mean you carry access to nearly all information constantly. This shifts human cognition toward different skills. Being good at finding and evaluating information becomes more important. Having information memorized becomes less important, except for core knowledge that enables thinking. Understanding this trend helps you develop relevant skills for a world where information access is ubiquitous, but judgment and synthesis are still human skills. The confirmation bias. People seek out information that confirms what they already believe and ignore information that contradicts it. This is confirmation bias, one of the most powerful and pervasive cognitive biases. Understanding it is essential because it shapes how you process information and make decisions. When you have a belief, you notice evidence that supports it and dismiss evidence against it. This happens automatically and unconsciously. You genuinely believe you are being objective while actually being selective. Fighting confirmation bias requires deliberate effort. Actively seek out information that contradicts your beliefs. Look for evidence you are wrong rather than evidence you are right. This is uncomfortable but necessary for accurate understanding. You can also use awareness of confirmation bias to understand why people disagree. They are not seeing the same evidence you are seeing even though the same information is available. They are selectively processing information through their existing beliefs. Recognizing this helps you communicate more effectively. Providing more evidence for your position often does not help because their confirmation bias filters it out. Instead, you need to understand their framework and show how evidence fits within it or challenges core assumptions they hold. The bias is strongest for beliefs tied to identity. If being right about something is part of who you are, confirmation bias becomes nearly impenetrable. Information threatening your belief feels like a personal attack. Creating space between beliefs and identity helps reduce confirmation bias. You can be interested in truth more than being right. When you care more about getting it right than being right, confirmation bias weakens. This is a choice you can make consciously. The bias also affects memory. You remember information that confirmed your beliefs better than information that contradicted them. This creates a feedback loop where your memory of the evidence becomes increasingly one-sided over time, even if the actual evidence you encountered was balanced. Keeping written records of evidence, including contradictory evidence, helps compensate for selective memory. The curse of specificity. Detailed plans feel more credible and achievable than vague plans, even when the details are basically made up. This is the curse of specificity. The specificity creates an illusion of control and predictability. Understanding this helps you be skeptical of overly detailed plans for uncertain future events. The details feel reassuring, but often do not reflect real knowledge. They just make uncertainty seem manageable. You can use this effect by providing specific details in your plans and proposals. The specificity makes them feel more credible, even if many details are guesses. This is not about lying, but about recognizing that people respond better to specific plans than to honest admissions of uncertainty. The curse is that the specific plan becomes a constraint. Once you have detailed plans, deviating from them feels like failure even when deviation would be better. The specificity locks you into a path that may not remain optimal as circumstances change. This argues for detailed planning in the near term, where you have real information, but keeping longer-term plans deliberately vague to maintain flexibility. The specific near-term plan provides direction and credibility. The vague long-term plan preserves adaptability. The effect also appears in forecasting. Specific forecasts feel more credible than ranges or uncertainties, even when the specificity is false precision. A forecast of 3.2% growth feels more credible than a forecast of 2 to 4% growth, even though the range is more honest about uncertainty. Fighting the curse of specificity means valuing appropriate vagueness. Sometimes the honest answer is a range or uncertainty. Forcing false specificity creates illusion of knowledge that leads to poor decisions. Being comfortable with vagueness and uncertainty when that reflects reality improves decision quality, even though it feels less satisfying than false precision. Understanding that people are drawn to specificity even when it is not warranted helps you provide enough specificity to be credible while maintaining enough flexibility to adapt. This balance is better than either rigid detailed plans or completely vague directions. The Ostrich Effect. People avoid information that might be unpleasant or threatening. This is the Ostrich Effect, named after the myth that ostriches bury their heads in sand. You know you should check your bank balance, but you avoid it because it might be bad news. You know you should get that health symptom checked, but you delay because you fear what you might learn. Understanding this effect helps you overcome it. The information exists whether you look at it or not. Avoiding the information does not make the situation better, and often makes it worse. Building the habit of confronting unpleasant information quickly prevents small problems from becoming large ones. The effect is driven by short-term emotion regulation. Not knowing feels better in the moment than knowing bad news. But this short-term comfort comes at the cost of long-term problems. Recognizing this trade-off helps you choose the temporary discomfort of facing reality over the false comfort of ignorance. You can help others overcome the ostrich effect by making it easier to face information, remove barriers to checking, provide support for dealing with bad news, make the process less intimidating. Often people avoid information because they imagine the process of dealing with it will be overwhelming. Making that process clear and manageable reduces avoidance. The ostrich effect applies to organizations too. Bad information gets suppressed because no one wants to be the bearer of bad news. This prevents problems from being addressed until they become crises. Creating a culture where bad news is welcomed and rewarded rather than punished helps overcome organizational ostrich effect. The effect also interacts with optimism bias. You avoid checking because you optimistically assume things are probably fine. This combination of biases can be dangerous. You do not look, and you assume good news, when reality might be quite different. Forcing yourself to check regularly and to assume nothing prevents this combination from creating blind spots. The ostrich effect is understandable as human weakness, but it is also a solvable problem through systems and habits that make facing reality routine rather than optional.